For more chapters, join my Patreon. Link in description. Chapter 51, James Moriarty 1. Walking alone in the dark hallway of the stadium, a person popped her head out from the corner as if she had been waiting. First, no, Professor Ludger. Sedna, right? Sedna Rochin, who had brown, volumized hair. She brightened her face the moment she saw Ludger, as she had been waiting for him. After looking around for a while and checking if there were any other people, she opened her mouth when she thought it was okay to speak. Congratulations on winning the bet. Yes. More than that, are you all right? Maybe you've gotten too much attention from inside the academy because of this incident. The other members are worried as well. The part that Sedna was concerned about was that Ludger was hiding in Surin under a false identity. However, his recent moves had attracted too much attention in Surin. In that case, no matter what he did, their eyes would follow him, which would significantly interfere with him in a long-range plan. Ludger shook his head at her concern. It's okay. I prepared myself for when it became like this. You prepared yourself. Sedna, do you know something about the principal of Surin? Sedna nodded immediately when the principal's name came out. Yes, her name is Alyssa Willow. She is a famous wizard who achieved the 6th rank of lecture class at a young age. She's now the principal of Surin. She's a woman whom you can never let your guard down to. Yes, she's currently suspecting me. Do you mean Professor Ludger? The principal is aware that our people are hiding in Surin. Maybe I'm now on the list of her suspects, even if I'm a professor. That? I need to get rid of her suspicions now. Because of that, it will be impossible for me to contact other members, but it can't be helped. You came here as a professor so you could be less suspicious, though. It was something I had to do anyway. It's a profitable deal if I gain reliability from Surin through this incident, but we need a little more time to do that. As expected, it's like that. I believe in you. Sedna, who had already been properly blinded by Ludger, believed Ludger's words without a question. Actually, it wasn't a complete lie either. Ludger's behavior in which he distinguished himself in Surin was based on his intention to look good to the principal. However, for Sedna, there were some concerns that Ludger might be receiving too much attention. In fact, when she secretly listened to other members, there were even talks that said Ludger was a first order, but that he didn't have anything to do to the point that it became weird. Yes. As expected, there's no way Professor Ludger was like that. She believed in Ludger, and she also wanted to believe him in the future. It was the first time there had been a person who listened to her so well. Having suspicions toward such a person itself felt like committing a crime that could not be washed away. Sedna, the same goes for you. Do your best as a student now, as you are now a student in Surin. Is that so? Yes. You are the only one among the other members who can make easy contact with because I'm a professor and you are a student. They won't doubt us just because we meet and have a conversation, but I can't thoughtlessly meet a student who has no actual business with me. Of course. You should make yourself prominent as a model student. The more you do that, the more suspicious eyes from others will subside. I see. Yes. In other words, it's a mission just for the two of us to adjust thoroughly to our own identities and our own position. Do you understand? A mission. Just for the two of us. Sedna's eyes went blank when Ludger used the word us. Looking at her expression, Ludger thought that it was fortunate. If I've explained it to this extent, she'll understand quite well, right? He had been working hard because he was absorbed in his work as Surin's professor. However, Ludger had never ignored the existence of the Black Dawn Society, even for a moment. In their eyes, he was nominally an executive who held a title of First Order in the Black Dawn Society. The problem was that Ludger did not yet know what he had to do as an executive after he infiltrated Surin. All he learned from the interpretation of the cipher was for him to infiltrate Surin and gain their favor. And after that, had their original plan been decided? Or was a new order going to be issued in the future according to the later situation? Ludger didn't know that. But he couldn't even ask Sedna. How could she know what kind of mission an executive had come for in the end? I have to figure it out by myself. It was highly likely that he was directly ordered by Zero Order, or that another First Order was sharing the work with him together. The way to find out right away was that he had to find another First Order who had infiltrated Surin. However, in a situation where he couldn't find the other First Order, Ludger had to work as much as possible while clearing the suspicion of the Black Dawn Society. That was why he deliberately moved more eagerly as a professor. It's true that the principal suspects me, and it's true that I need time to clear her suspicions. Using that as an excuse, I can at least quell the growing discontent of the secret society, and it was also possible to extend the deadlines that were given under this pretext. In fact, even though he only explained it that way, Sedna seemed to be convinced immediately. No, can't she be a fair example because she's just extremely praising towards the First Order? But it was okay. If Sedna could go forward and explain it to the other members instead of him, it would be much easier for Ludger. In fact, Sedna was already full of such thoughts. As expected, Professor Ludger. We were worried that something might happen to him. It turns out that he had planned it all along. Sedna's social status had led to similar bullying within the organization. But recently, the other members had stopped irritating her because she had been acting as if she was Ludger's full-time subordinate. That made Sedna respect Ludger even more, thinking that it was also a blessing. He's even worried about someone like me and giving me that kind of advice. He's really awesome. As Ludger had said that, Sedna decided to obey the order even after she died. Explain it well to the others. Yes, just leave it to me. And? Yes, do you have anything else to tell me? No. Never mind, I'll talk to you later, and it's nice to see you more confident than before. Ludger's last compliment gave Sedna a tingling and electrifying shock all over her body. I will leave it to you. Yes, I will do it even if I have to die. Don't die. Yes. I will never die even if I have to die. Yes. Whatever. Ludger left Sedna behind, who was becoming increasingly burdensome every time he saw her returning to my private accommodation. I entered the room and briefly summarized what I had to do. First of all, through this open duel, I have extensively developed the image of being on the principal's faction. I don't know how the principal herself will take it, but she has her own circumstances, so it will be hard for her to throw me out. For the moment, the principal's faction seemed to be more dominant, but the noble faction led by Hugo could not be looked down on either. No matter what anyone said, the biggest force among the students was Freuden's power, who had gathered the aristocratic students. The aristocratic professors, including Hugo, had joined hands with Freuden. The principal's power seemed strong, but if they properly opposed the principal's will, it would be difficult for the principal to decide anything recklessly. And thanks to the fact that I attracted the principal's attention, I got the justification that, even though I'm an executive of the Black Dawn Society, I still can't move hastily. Other members from the secret society wouldn't want to contact me recklessly, either. In other words, I got an exemption from doing anything in the Black Dawn Society for a certain period of time. So let's put off the Black Dawn Society for now. As expected, is Surin's side the most important thing? With that open duel, I had turned completely hostile to Hugo's faction. But I didn't care much about that part. I was going to quit after 2 years anyway. Being obnoxious to the aristocratic teachers wouldn't cause me any major problems. They would mess with me a little unpleasantly, but it was only at a level of being cute compared to all the groups of people I had experienced in my whole life. Most of all, I saw some kind of possibility through that day's duel. Aiden, I've felt it before, but he's definitely a good guy. He has a moderate sense, a moderate good side, and he is a hard worker. It was just amazing that he had learned the moving magus in 3 days, although I had taught him a little intensively. Was it his talent, or was it more like a tenacious effort? Considering that a wizard couldn't fully master moving magus just because they were good at using their head, he might have been born with the ability to use his body as well. His movement when he had cut the magic using anti-magic, it was definitely a performance that one could see from someone who had trained with a sword before. Considering that, Aiden was highly likely to stand out in a real battle. Indeed, that's understandable, considering who his teacher is. It could be inferred because I had met a wizard whom I assumed was Aiden's teacher. Well, I was actually quite certain about it. Aiden's posture that he showed once was exactly the same as the textbook example of swordsmanship that the person I was thinking of usually used. I thought that he'd live alone his whole life and die without a single soul knowing about him. But it turned out that he had gotten a disciple. If Aiden is an anti-magic owner, he will rise to a considerable position in Surin, at least. I finished a simple calculation in my head. I will use Surin and some special students to fight against the Black Dawn secret society. As I was squeezed between the two with one foot on both sides, the last thing I needed was to increase the pressure that weighed down on me. The thing that bothered me the most was the Black Dawn society. If I reduced the power of the society members in the academy by squeezing their power little by little, I'm sure my chances for surviving will be that much higher. Aiden, Leo, and Tessie. The abilities of those three musketeers were objectively worth evaluating well. If I looked at the talent that they had, it could be the best amongst the first years. If I added Lynn, who had judgment eyes, to the group, it won't be bad. Of course, that might not be enough, so it seemed necessary for me to look for more other people for assurance, just in case. If I made them collide with each other, I would be able to get out of a dead end. That's all I should do for the let the barbarians fight it out among themselves method. I have to build up the strength on my side, too. My situation was under pressure from both organizations, and I, as an individual, was about to be crushed. Simply weakening both groups couldn't be the fundamental solution to the situation. So what was the method? I also have to make my own organization. In fact, I preferred to move alone. But as long as I needed to stay in the Empire, I could no longer do a solo play. I needed more people. In addition to hands, I needed to call the people I had connections with before and create a new organization. That organization would be my strength, and that power would make me able to resist the forces that oppressed me. Talk of the devil, and he is sure to appear, they said. I was just thinking of him, and the crystal ball I left in my room began to sparkle. The fact that the marble for personal communication that I handed to Hans rang. It could only mean one thing. Hans, what's the matter? I checked everything around the area according to your order. Was it because of that? Considering your skills, you'll have as much information as I would. And yet, since you contacted me separately, it seems that you need some force. You're so quick in catching it. You are right. From now on, I need some armed force. You knew it too, didn't you, that I'm not good at fighting? I didn't expect anything from you in that department since the first time. Anyways, I need your help now. I see. It was not bad timing. I got up from my seat, dressed in a black long coat for outdoor use, and wore a gentleman's hat on my head. So when are you going to come? I think we'll have to deal with it by the end of the week at the latest. I'll come right now. Pardon? Because he didn't know that I'd say I'd go right then, I heard a bewildered exclamation from beyond the crystal ball. Don't you think it's better to deal with it quickly? That's that, but are you going to be okay? You are so busy, though. It'll be over soon anyway. How are you so sure about it? Because I'm going to make it that way. Chapter 52, James Moriarty 2. The air lingering in the back alleys of Leathervelk was cold enough to make people's skin sting in the dark and deep space. Hans raised his head while leaning against the wall. It's too high. Hans was also proud to have traveled around many cities and seen many things, but Leathervelk, the imperial metropolis, was taller than any other city he had ever seen. The same went for even the shabby back alley where he was standing. It was like a prison of bricks and brass. Should I carry around a wire hook like he does later? If he had a wire hook, he thought it would be easy to escape from Leathervelk at a dangerous moment. Of course, the biggest reason was that Ludger had looked cool when he used it to chase the werewolf. At that moment, the darkness beyond the alleyway swayed and a shadow emerged. It was a surprising sight that seemed like a ghost had appeared, but Hans, who took his back off the wall, greeted it while adjusting his collar, because he had seen such a sight a few times already. You came? Whoosh. Before he knew it, the shadow changed its shape and took the form of a human being. He wore a black Inverness coat with a cape on its shoulder. He wore black leather gloves on his hands and had a gold and black cane. Unlike usual, he wore a silk hat with a hairstyle that was neatly pulled back and didn't tie his hair at all. That alone made Ludger's impression look very different. How about the situation? Yeah, let me tell you what I found out first. Our hideout is in the back alley, isn't it? Yes. Well, obviously, there are various underworld organizations dividing their power and sharing it around there. Ainz organized the information that he had confirmed by himself and gave it to Ludger. He had been wandering around so much for the past few days to check the information out anyway. They are largely divided into 4 organizations. There is one strongest and largest organization among them, and the other 3 are medium-sized organizations. So there are 4 places in total. Maybe it's because this is a big city, but the number is a lot. I'll start by explaining the medium-sized organizations. First of all, there is a circus built by people who are physically disabled or neglected. Circus! It's a must to make a living in a city like this with a proper talent. It's a circus called Kirchus that's also some kind of a gang and union where those people gathered. Ludger nodded his head as he understood Hans's explanation. Kirchus, huh? All right. What's next? And then there's a place consisting of only women. No matter what city you go to, such a place will never be left out from the underworld. So it's a brothel. Without even a hint, Ludger guessed it right. Average people would express their discomfort or displeasure just by thinking of the word. But it was a place that could never be left out in the underworld. Because this place was that kind of world. Even on Earth in the 21st century, that kind of place had always existed. But it's not just a weak brothel, and I feel like they're living as an organization because they have their own know-how. They have considerable ability in gathering information, and they're also reaching out to many businesses in the city. They share patterns of tiny black roses to identify members of their own organization, so they're called Black Rose Women. Black Rose Women, huh? Ludger recited the name in a low tone. How about the last one? The last one is a combination of children and old people. The people who are very old can't do their jobs properly, but they are full of people with know-how and experience. And children are still young, but they jump to the front line to make money. Ludger nodded his head. In fact, children who worked at a young age and were treated as labor force were a common sight in the world, because the streets were full of kids selling newspapers right then. In addition, there were children who pickpocketed as petty thieves or children who were in charge of chores at a mansion. The worst of those child employment jobs would be those doing physical labor in factories or mines without getting proper rest. They call the place Old Kids, where old people and children gather. They are also focused on gathering information, making them and the Black Rose Women the 2 largest information-gathering groups. Because children can listen to a lot of things. To organize the information Ainz gave Ludger, it was like this. Circus Group Kirchus, the brothel Black Rose Women, the labor union of old people and children, Old Kids. It was a total of 3 medium-sized organizations in the underworld. Now there's only one big guy left, huh? It's Crimson Society, a back-alley gangster group. Crimson Society, huh? I think I've heard of that name. They're the ones who dominate the back alleys of Leathervelk. Kidnapping, intimidation, potion and drug distribution, the liquor industry, muscle work, and so on. There is almost no dirty work that they haven't done. If the first 3 organizations were formed by standing together to survive on their own, Crimson Society was literally an inevitable existence created by gathering the shadows of the world and the insects that were attracted by the odor. These back alleys are maintained by the Crimson Society and the other 3 organizations in a balance of each other's power. It's more like the Crimson Society is doing all the wicked jobs and the other 3 are standing together with their power. So it's the Crimson Society that I need to deal with. You are right. The other 3 organizations are the ones who don't even respond unless we're messing with them directly in the first place. In fact, their danger is low, but the guys from Crimson Society are different. I see. It's because they're either going to overpower the small organizations under them, or they're going to destroy those organizations. Please be careful. They're so strong that it's hard to overpower them. Recently, they started to send some people to secretly watch our hideout. So first, just grab their tails one by one. Ludger shook his head and cut off Ainz's words, who was speaking his own opinion. No, never mind. I don't have to grab their tail first. It's a waste of time. Pardon? Hit their head, then the rest of them will bend down on their own. And no. But how will you do that? Ludger smirked at Hanz, who was bewildered. Of course, through taking the bull by the horns. He had purposely dressed up the way he was to do that. Hanz was about to tell him not to say anything crazy, but eventually raised the white flag when he realized that Ludger was serious when he said so. Whatever Hanz said, Ludger would do what he wanted anyway, and he would succeed, because he'd always been like that. Indeed. That outfit, too. Are you going to use that identity this time? You know that one, a self-proclaimed criminal consultant, an important figure who dominates the underworld. Yeah, Ludger replied while putting on a gold monocle that could only be worn on one eye from his pocket. His usual sharp and cold soldier-like appearance was erased at once. On the contrary, he appeared to be a man who seemed intelligent and calm, but seemed to have a somewhat venomous aura. That was one of Ludger's past identities that he would use. Are you really going to take the bull by the horns? Why are you like that? It's because the atmosphere within the Crimson Society is currently pretty chaotic. Unexpectedly, the members of the organization are all gathered together with keen edges to their blades. Chaotic, huh? I think I know why they're being like that. How do you know that? Hanz was curious when Ludger replied that he already knew something that Hanz had not found out yet. I think that's probably why the Crimson Society is in a mess right now, because of the death of millionaire Belfort Rickson. How come the death of Belfort Rickson? Ah, you've noticed, I see. Hanz had become even more serious as his question had been answered. So there was some kind of connection between Belfort Rickson and the Crimson Society. Yes, Belfort Rickson was notorious for doing a lot of dirty work since even before this. Death under suspicious circumstances of his rival businessmen, fires in shantytowns against factory construction, and so on. Were all those works handled by that person on his own? He had an accomplice that could be ordered instead. And that's the Crimson Society. Indeed. They need a rich man whom they can get along with, and they take care of the dirty work instead. Hanz, now that Belfort Rickson is dead, the Crimson Society must be pretty hot-tempered because their biggest cash cow is gone. They'll stay calm for now, but they'll move to make up for the short money sooner or later. So that's why they're gathered. No, wait. So you're actually their enemy and the culprit, aren't you? Of course. Hanz looked speechless at Ludger's relaxed answer. In fact, Ludger had killed Belfort Rickson, which was why the Crimson Society was so angry. Of course, they didn't even know that Ludger had killed him, so they couldn't call him an enemy. And now is a better time instead because the people who are normally supposed to be scattered are gathered in one place for the first time in a long time. Are you really going to do it? Why? Well, you're a wizard, so it'll be fine no matter how many gang members you run into, but the problem is that the Crimson Society isn't an ordinary gangster group. Not an ordinary gangster group. Armed with all kinds of weapons, even though no bullet will work in front of a wizard, there's a whole bunch of blade masters among them. You know, they are the ones who tried to become knights but then lacked money or personality, or the ones who got stuck with mercenary work. There are a couple of such people in the Crimson Society. I guess that's why the Crimson Society occupies first place in the back alleys. So they have strength equal to a semi-knight, is that it? It got a little annoying when there were knights mixed among them. If he thought of a knight on Earth, he'd think of an old-fashioned, armor-clad butcher. But it wasn't like that here. A knight was a superhuman. A knight had extraordinary physical abilities that could deflect bullets as long as they held weapons in their hands. Knights had been rivals to wizards for a long time. So as a wizard, the most uncomfortable type of people to deal with were the knights, because people who dealt with auras could cut down or break through some decent magic. Therefore, Hanz wanted to take a safe path, even if it took a little more time, because it was too dangerous to enter the enemy camp as he pleased. That's interesting. But Ludger smiled rather amusedly at Hanz's remark. Hanz thought he heard it wrong. No, will you still go after all this? Is there a reason for me not to go? There are semi-knights there. Those semi-knights are just that, they're not real knights. Hanz, I don't think you know it well, But the difference between semi-knights and general knights is big, and the difference between the knights with those who are the captains is even bigger. No, I'm not saying that I'm going to talk about it. I don't know about if they were regular knights, but semi-knights are nothing great. Ainz shut his mouth and contemplated seriously, thinking, is that so? After listening to Ludger's confident tone, there was nothing particularly wrong with what Ludger had said. The difference between the semi-knights and the general knights was actually large. In fact, to tell it in a good way, they're semi-knights, but in reality, those were people who couldn't become knights. It was true that they were even weaker than an apprentice knight who served beside the knights and received their teachings. I think it seems like that after hearing it briefly. Come to think of it, Ainz was judging the situation too pessimistically. Yeah. He was uselessly scared because there was the word knight in their title, but they were actually nothing, right? Ainz, who thought he was worried too much, nodded his head while thinking that he couldn't help it. Well, if that's what you say. Of course, it was Ainz's big mistake. It was true that the semi-knights were weaker compared to general or apprentice knights, but they were not that weak. There was a difference in their power, but it could not be called a crucial difference. Even if they were semi-knights, they were talented people who could cut people's throats with only a spoon. For the people of the underworld their skill was akin to a wall that they couldn't resist. Ludger knew the fact, but he hid it from Ainz. Even if Ainz knew it anyway, he would still go into the Crimson Society's camp. It was just easier for Ainz to follow him without knowing anything. Take this. Ludger threw something at Ainz. Ainz grabbed it and went to check what it was. I need your help a little bit. Are you sure? What Ludger threw at Ainz was a wolf's fang. Chapter 53, James Moriarty 3. Ainz didn't bother to ask why Ludger had given him the wolf's fang. It was him who knew his physical type better than anyone else. Even so, if I go alone, the atmosphere won't be right. I need one big guy behind me to threaten them properly. I don't know. If I get into a fight like this, I will escape right away. You don't have to worry about that. Ha, Ainz sighed. He held the wolf's fang in his hand and stabbed it into the palm of his hand until it was bleeding. Whoosh. And shortly afterwards, around the wound by the wolf's teeth, black hair began to grow on Ainz's body. The gene contained in the wolf's teeth penetrated his skin and made contact with his blood, triggering his physical transformation in which the beast's factor was expressed. Crack. With the sounds of bone twisting, Ainz turned almost 1.5 times bigger than usual. In time, Ainz was replaced by a black-haired werewolf wearing clothes that were almost about to burst. Ainz carefully took off his top and placed it nearby as his clothes were stuffy. Is this enough? Not bad. Well, if I can do as I want, I'd say you don't need pants either, but please be careful about that. Yes, I should understand that part. If his transformation went away afterwards and he took off his pants as well, there would be nothing more horrible than that. Ainz breathed a sigh of relief. That's a relief. Your size is not bad either. I'm sure that your shape will change depending on which animal's teeth you use. Well, that's something that I've had to learn after an awful lot of experience, even though I didn't want to know about it. That's a shame. I wanted to keep the teeth of a bear or a tiger if I could get them. Ainz didn't have to be bitten directly by the beast. His physical type was triggered only when the animal's factor touched the inside of his body. In other words, it meant that his conditions for transformation were met just by puncturing his skin with an animal's teeth. But I think this wolf's fang is especially amazing, am I right? Ainz looked around at his own figure and said so. Ainz, who had turned into various shapes unwantedly, felt special how he was at that moment. His body was full of strength, and his muscles were 1.5 times thicker than usual. Ainz was sure it wasn't just a common wolf's fang. Yeah, it's a fang of a black fang that exists in the North Continent. Do you mean the especially ferocious beasts that are dangerous to kill? No wonder I became more powerful than usual. Compared to anything you've transformed into so far, you can be proud of this being in the top ranks. Of course, if you use it that I gave you just in case, you can be stronger than anyone else. Ainz frowned until it was clearly recognizable in his face, even though he was transformed into a wolf, as he heard the word it from Ludger's mouth. but I don't want to use such an extremely dangerous thing. If I did something wrong, I'd probably be eaten by the wilderness. I handed it over to you just in case. We don't know how the world would turn out. Use it if you think your life is in danger. It's better than dying. That's that, but... Hands recalled the huge molar. It was a tooth, but it was so big that it had to be carved and made into a dagger. It was a special gift from Ludger for Hands. Hands, who thought his physical type was a curse, still kept that tooth, even though he was reluctant. Then shall we go? I'll say it again, if there's a fight, I'll run right away. I already said it. You just need to set the mood. I'll go in first, so follow me when I send you a signal. Fee, I get it. Ludger, who was dressed in black, and Hands, who had become a shadowy beast, disappeared as if they were melting into the darkness of the alleyway located on the outskirts of Leathervelk downtown. Poges Street was famous for its many stores, restaurants, and music halls. There was also a workshop to make a power device made of mechanical springs, which was an active place for children as well as adults, in the depths of Poges Street, in the boundary between the bright outside part of the city and the back alleys. Damn it. There was a man with red hair who blew a bottle of alcohol and drank it. Compared to others who had muscular builds, his build was nothing remarkable, but his face was pretty much so. Having long sideburns, he had a large scar across one of his eyes, so his ferocity was extraordinary. When he became annoyed, his subordinates around him walked on eggshells. At that time, the subordinate who played the role of an advisor took courage and stepped up. "Big brother, are you all right?" "Do I look all right to you right now?" It's hard to say yes, honestly. The man was the Crimson Snake, Daughtry, the leader of the Crimson Society. It was an obvious thing for him to get angry right then. It was because Belfort Rickson, the biggest cash cow and supporter in the Crimson Society, had died all of a sudden. From Daughtry's point of view, who was the closest to Belfort and raised the Crimson Society with Belfort's power on his back, one of the big pillars that supported him had collapsed. There were still a few more pillars to help them, but the problem was that before Belfort Rickson died, the Crimson Society had invested a huge amount of money in his project. It was an obvious fact that all of Belfort's wealth had scattered because the conductor of the project was dead. Most investors would share their invested money, but it was difficult to recover the invested money from Daughtry's point of view, who couldn't spend money fairly. That wouldn't completely ruin the Crimson Society, but it couldn't be helped that the atmosphere within the society became uneasy. But it's still bearable, so why don't we seek a new way? That's why I summoned all of you here. I think we'll have to significantly expand our business soon. Business expansion, that was what he said, but it would be a work accompanied by blood and violence. It suggested that maybe they would fight with another organization that had only been snarling and glaring at them so far. But no one was worried about it. They were the Crimson Society, and their forces were the best in the back alleys of Leathervelk. First of all, let's dominate over the Black Rose women, no matter what. When Daughtry muttered like that, "Creak," the door of the bar creaked open and a person entered. Huh? What? At first, they thought he was a member of the organization who arrived late, but they were bound to change their mind soon. The man seemed too tidy to be a member of the Crimson Society. He wore a black Inverness coat and held a cane in his hand. He also wore a black silk hat on his head and a monocle on one of his eyes. His figure was that of a gentleman who looked rich and relaxed. Who the hell is that brat? Hey, can't you see that the bar's door is closed? Daughtry glared at the uninvited guest with his drunken, red face. The man took an empty chair near him and sat at the center of the bar, seemingly indifferent to Daughtry's gaze. As the man was sitting with his legs slightly apart and holding a cane with both hands, he was full of strange dignity that was difficult to describe in words. Who the hell is that brat? Is he crazy? All members of the Crimson community glared at the uninvited guest. After Daughtry emptied his liquor bottle, he stood up from his seat. Who are you? Daughtry, the leader of the Crimson Society, am I right? Yeah, but I haven't seen you yet. Have we met before? It's the first time we've met. Daughtry laughed as he was dumbfounded. Who? You came in here alone, even though you knew we were the Crimson Society. Brother, what do you believe in to do that? Something I believe in. I came here because I have it." Despite the glares from all sides, the man was confident without any fear. Daughtry felt a strange sense of uneasiness at his appearance. He didn't seem to be bluffing. Having been wandering around for a long time in those back alleys, he could distinguish between the reckless bravado of incompetent people and the confidence of the really talented ones. Among the two, the man in front of him was the latter. The clothes he's wearing look luxurious, and his atmosphere itself is extraordinary. That kind of person came to see him. Daughtry thought he needed to hear the man's story first. For what reason did you come to see me?" "It hasn't been long since I came to this city, so I'm going to start a new business." "Oh, business? Good, you came to see the right person." Daughtry clapped his hands and rejoiced. That man talked about business, but everyone there knew that it meant money and dirty work. With the man's outfit and his atmosphere, seeing that he had gone there while knowing something, Daughtry was sure that he was in the same league as Belfort Rickson. A rich merchant with a lot of money and a black heart. Customers who wanted to make money through all methods. He's a cash cow that I must catch. But Daughtry was not quickly pleased. Wasn't it their law that it would be easy for him to get hit in the back of the head if he believed in that person blindly when there were still a lot of things he didn't know about that person? If he didn't know the person yet, he should never trust him. Even if he knew that person, he should only trust half of them. Betray before you get betrayed. It was the way and regulation of people living in the gutter. "So, what's your name?" When asked by Daughtry, the man spoke in a rather soft tone. "My name is James Moriarty." "Huh, James Moriarty?" Daughtry wondered at the name that felt somewhat strange. He thought he had heard of that name, but he didn't remember much. At that time, his right-hand man, who was his deputy and advisor, rushed up to Daughtry and whispered to him, "James Moriarty. It's him. Who is he, the important figure who once dominated the underworld of the Delica kingdom?" Ah. Daughtry could only think of the name when his right-hand man said it. James Moriarty? Or, as the people called him, Professor Moriarty, he was a notorious criminal consultant who called himself a professor. Delica was an iron kingdom that had made remarkable progress in the steel industry. It was that man who stood right under its light, dominating the darkness there. The rumor was half as famous as a legendary tale in their field. But was it for real? Daughtry had doubts. It was a few years ago that Professor Moriarty had disappeared from Delica. Rumor had it that he was killed by a well-known aristocratic detective. Some said he was killed and had rotted in a deep dungeon in Delica, and others said he chose to die by himself before being killed. Otherwise, there could not have been no news from him for years. Perhaps there was a possibility that the Professor Moriarty in front of him was fake. "Well, I can just check it out." Daughtry coughed and greeted him. "So you are Professor Moriarty. I heard your name often. I'm glad that you know me." By the way, isn't this a little vague?" "It's a little vague as to whether you are really Professor Moriarty or not. You think I'm just impersonating? That's because someone who suddenly disappeared a few years ago suddenly appeared in front of me." Moriarty glanced sideways at his surroundings. Daughtry's men were taking out their weapons one by one from their waistlines and holding them. The weapons were easy to carry, so they were closer to handguns than daggers. The smell of cheap gunpowder that gently stimulated the tip of his nose convinced him of such thoughts. Knowing that all of the men were given guns, he realized that the Crimson Society was a pretty big place. "I want to warn you about one thing. Please speak. I recommend you not to pull a gun if you can avoid it." Moriarty immediately raised his right hand. Clack, clack, clack. At the same time, countless men around him pulled out their guns and aimed them at Moriarty. If he did anything suspicious, he'd become a beehived corpse. But Moriarty wasn't scared at all. At the spirit of his haughtiness that seemingly told them to do it if they could, Daughtry started to wonder if the man in front of him was the real Moriarty. "You're quite noisy." Some members of the organization were furious with anger as they heard Moriarty's provocative tone. They looked at Daughtry and asked him if they should shoot that man. Daughtry was contemplating for a moment, and then he nodded slightly. His men, who confirmed his signal, slowly pulled the trigger of the guns in their hands. Their target was not his head but his shoulders. If they gave him a shot of lead, he might show them his true colors, clack, but the bullets didn't shoot out. Oh, ooh, the guns don't work, and it wasn't only that. The guns of all the members of the organization who were gathered in the bar were frozen. That's why I warned you. Moriarty laughed quietly at their confusion. Not to pull the guns. Why, wizard? Daughtry knew why all the guns were suddenly frozen. It was clearly the silence of fire magic that the wizards used. That meant that the man in front of him was certainly a wizard, if nothing else. At that moment, Moriarty whistled. When the sound of his whistle rang within the bar and spread out beyond, soon the door of the bar was smashed and a giant entered. Arg! What the hell is that? The giant was a huge wolf who was walking on 2 feet. It had a huge size with black fur all over its body, and a body height of more than 2.5 meters, and sharp claws that grew on both of its arms. Everyone knew about the werewolves' crisis that had made Leathervelk chaotic not long before. Slowly entering the bar, the werewolf stopped and stood behind Moriarty. As if protecting him, Daughtry immediately changed his attitude at such an appearance. Oh my, so you are real. I didn't recognize the noble. Did I give enough proof? Ha, more than enough. Then we can finally have a genuine conversation. Yes, what kind of business do you want? What do we need to do? I have a message to tell you first. A message to tell us. Daughtry opened his eyes wide while asking the meaning of Moriarty's words. You know, I don't really like this kind of dirty and disgusting stuff. What? It means that the Crimson Society will disappear from this place as of today. Chapter 54, Crimson Snake in the Mud 1. Daughtry was aware of what Moriarty said. In order to survive in this world, the first and foremost thing he needed was a quick sense. Daughtry immediately grasped the situation. Everyone kill him. Daughtry's command was quick. If Moriarty had come to get rid of them, there was no other answer but to fight hard instead of bothering to deal with him or whatnot. Daughtry's men moved under his order. They threw away the guns that didn't work and took out daggers. However, the flow was not so good. As the space was limited, their failure to bring proper weapons became poison to them. Kill him. But their opponent was a wizard. The moment they hesitated, they would obviously die. There was a chance of winning if they rushed toward him from all sides. More than anything else, Moriarty was sitting in the middle of the bar and not somewhere far from them, even though what bothered them was the black werewolf who was standing behind him. They numbered close to 100 people. As expected. Ainz gave him a questioning gaze as he saw the Crimson Society gangsters running toward both of them from all sides. What should I do now? Ainz was honestly amazed that the Crimson Society did not run away, let alone be scared by him. A sense of loyalty. No. Rather than that, they were so spiteful that no matter who their opponent was, they would rush toward their opponent and bite their neck. Just like the name of the Crimson Snake that lived in the southern jungle. The Crimson Society was full of those kinds of people. Ludger didn't answer Ainz's question, he showed it with his action instead. Tap. Ludger lifted the cane in his hand and tapped it gently on the floor. At that moment, shadows began to flow from the cane and spread throughout the bar. Oh, ooh. What's this? The Crimson Society members tried to move after they were confused by the shadows, but their bodies remained still. No, to be exact, their bodies moved, but it wasn't according to their own will. The darkness swallowed up all the light inside the bar. If compared to the alleyways outside that had no streetlights, Ludger's shadows were much denser and darker. It was a pitch blackness in which light had completely disappeared, and within that blackness there was only one person. Ludger himself was able to move without a hitch. What? Arg? I can't see anything. Screams resounded in the dark. All of them were agonizing death screams by members of the Crimson Society. There was a sword drawn from inside the cane. Ludger grabbed the sword and quickly killed the members one by one. Help me. Leader, please help me. Leader. As their colleagues died one by one and their voices were clearly heard, the rest of the organization members failed to stay sane. It was a horror where they couldn't see anything, and at the same time, they heard the sound of death steadily approaching them, so they couldn't hold their sanity. Die, just die. Arg, He's here, frightened. The organization members swung their weapons all over the place, unable to withstand the fear. And they aimed at other colleagues nearby them, and in an instant the bar turned into a battle where they were killing each other. It was not simple magic. To be exact, it was more like a complex magic that used darkness and shadow, and then added a curse that instilled fear in the opponent's minds that had been weakened. Based on the spellcasting elemental properties used, it was the third-tier darkness spell, the Dream of a Fool. It didn't work for people with strong mental powers or good abilities. In a space filled with only low-rank people, it was a spell that had a greater effect than everything else. Damn it. What are you guys doing? Hurry and stop him. Daughtry clenched his teeth and shouted. He could not see in front of himself, but his will was not shaken by that kind of darkness, because he had something to believe in. Following his command, the two men who had been standing guard for Daughtry near him moved. Whoosh, when the two wielded their swords, the aura that was placed on the tips of their blades cut the darkness that was made up of magic and crossed through it. Soon, the magic was cancelled and the surrounding light returned, plainly showing the appearance of the bar. Daughtry's lips trembled. The hell? The bar was a completely horrible mess. Fewer than 10 people survived among nearly 100 of his men. Even those few people were almost dying. They were bloody and full of wounds. Daughtry's bloodshot gaze turned to Moriarty, who stood at the center of the horrible scene. What about the wolf monster? Where did he disappear into? The werewolf had disappeared somewhere in the middle of the chaos, as he could not be seen, and Moriarty was alone. His figure, that standing still with a sword amidst the corpses, was like a grim reaper who appeared just before people's death. There was not a drop of blood on Moriarty's body, even though his surroundings were covered with blood. His appearance seemed to be that of someone who was beyond the world, so Daughtry unwittingly got goosebumps on his skin. Kill him. The two men moved as soon as Daughtry gave them the order. They were a big man with mostly shaved hair and a slender, long-haired man. The two went to either side and rushed toward Moriarty at terrifying speeds. Their speed was extremely fast. Average people would have allowed both men to approach them at the moment they said oh and immediately lost their heads. Semi-knight. Those who could not become knights, but had far more physical abilities than ordinary people. They're not something to look down on. Not only did they split his magic just then, but they were also the ones who knew how to deal with auras. Their level was almost equivalent to regular knights, even though they hadn't managed to enter the Knight's Order. They were stronger than apprentice knights. I don't think I'm going to lose, though. Ludger slightly stepped back and spilled a bottle of pills under his feet. Whoosh. Immediately afterward, the bottle of pills exploded and purple smoke spread widely around. Poison? The long-haired semi-knight stepped back and protected Daughtry. No matter what anyone said, the battle was over when the leader died. The big man tried to resist the poison by surrounding his body with an aura. At that moment, flying daggers flew while piercing through the smoke. Clang, clang, clang. The big man calmly swung his sword to strike all the flying daggers. It was a sudden attack, but he struck them all away with transcendent reflexes. But there was something he overlooked. The fact that there were poison bottles mixed between the flying daggers. Bomb. The poison from the exploded reagent bottle spilled all over his arm. Arg. However, no matter how much aura he emitted, the poison that came into direct contact with his skin could not be easily cured. What Ludger threw was more like a chemical that dissolved everything rather than a poison that reacted in one's body. Unless he protected his body with an aura shield, he couldn't prevent it. Darn it. In an instant, the big man, who couldn't use one of his arms, swung his blade with his remaining arm toward the purple smoke with a murderous gaze. Whoosh! A large wind blew from his sword, and the smoke was torn away. The big man, who was about to chase Ludger immediately, was confused when he could not see Ludger. Where is he? Be careful. Below you. At that moment, his colleague, who was watching from behind, warned the big man, but it was already too late. Whoosh! Ludger's sword, which popped out of the shadow below, pierced the big man's chin and emerged from the top of his head. Just because I'm a wizard doesn't mean I don't fight in close combat. Ludger said so and pulled the sword from the big man's corpse. The large corpse tilted and fell sideways. The reason for his defeat was that he had thought that, because his opponent was a wizard, the opponent would distance himself and prepare for the next magic. Therefore, Ludger was able to win immediately by exploiting the opponent's preconception. The long-haired guy, who had no choice but to watch his colleague's death, clenched his teeth. "You brat. What the hell are you?" "I told you before, I'm Professor James Moriarty. There is no way that rumors about a wizard who fights like that didn't spread in the first place. It's strange that I haven't heard from Moriarty in years as well. Are you hiding your real identity? Do I have any obligation to answer that? You are someone who is about to die, though." Ludger sneered at the long-haired man and showed a mocking laugh over his shoulder and toward Daughtry. Daughtry's face turned pale. Kill him? Kill that brat. Do as I pay you." One of the two men who held the greatest power in the Crimson Society had been killed. The only person Daughtry could trust now was the long-haired man who protected him. The long-haired man clicked his tongue and read the atmosphere. Seeing Ludger's moves in killing the other semi-knight, he seemed very experienced in combat. From his psychological warfare that caught the opponent off guard to his moves that did not even hesitate to engage in close combat as a wizard, he couldn't underestimate Ludger even the slightest bit. "You won't attack me. Will you let me live if I step back? You." Daughtry shouted with a pale face as he heard the long-haired man's words. Are you going to betray me now? Whether it's betrayal or whatever, look at our current situation. The guy who's as talented as I am died without having any chance. You want me to fight a monster like that? I gave you the money. That money is not more valuable than my life. Teetweiss, no, I will give you thrice of the money, including the portion that was meant for your dead colleague. So kill him. When Daughtry said that it was going to be 3 times the amount of money he usually received, the long-haired man's ears perked up as he was tempted. Thrice. Then it was worth the challenge, because he was also usually getting a lot of money. Is it possible? Ludger's presence was quite intimidating at first, but he had already seen the method he used to fight. Originally, fighting was about understanding the other person's method and reading their technique. If he couldn't suppress Ludger with his strength, then the top priority was to get his guard down no matter what and pierce through an opening. Actually, Ludger also fought like that. If he was careful about that, then somehow, at that moment, Ludger pulled a gun from his waist and shot toward them. Bang, bang. Oough! He deflected the 2 bullets fired at them with his sword, but the sense that he felt in his hands was somewhat strange. They weren't bullets. Rather, they were more like something with mana bullets. Crazy. He even uses this kind of thing. It was simply not the moves that the wizards he knew would show. They said that eccentric wizards sometimes did strange things, but it was completely beyond his common sense. At that moment, Ludger fired a mana bullet again. The long-haired man, who was deflecting the mana bullet with his sword, thought that he should not distance himself like that, so he rushed to Ludger. Ludger stepped back again. The long-haired guy, who was a semi-knight, was running much faster, but reagent bottles were rolling where Ludger stepped back. You think I'll react the same to what I saw just then? He had already seen Ludger's way of fighting and had noticed his moves. That was a bottle that spread poison fog. The long-haired guy swung his sword before the smoke was invoked. He had planned to cut the smoke down before it was invoked, but his face soon distorted. The sword. When he cut the bottles down, the sticky liquid that popped out from them locked his sword to the floor. He tried to pull the sword off by surrounding the sword with his aura, but there was a gap of a couple of seconds. Ludger aimed his gun at the long-haired man's forehead. If I can't block it, I should avoid it. With his reflexes, he could avoid flying bullets just by watching the other person pull the trigger. Therefore, he, who was concentrating on Ludger's figure, had no choice but to look down due to the sudden hot pain that he felt in his abdomen. Oh. There was something like a black spear piercing through his stomach. He turned his head and looked back, and the spear that was popping out from his shadow penetrated his abdomen from his back. How? The magic that wizards used, wasn't it usually invoked from the spellcaster? Ludger had used magic and rotated it away to aim for his back. It wasn't like that. If it was, he would have recognized it because he hadn't taken his eyes off Ludger. Then there was only one possibility. The magic was literally aimed at him after being invoked from a different direction. The magic was coming from a completely different place. I have never heard of thigh. Bong. Ludger's magic bullet pierced his forehead. Eventually, both of the people with semi-knight strength died in vain without being able to leave any scars on Ludger. After watching the scene from beginning to end, Daughtry plopped down on his spot as if it was slippery with a face like he was facing the Grim Reaper. Step. Step. Ludger slowly approached Daughtry and looked down at him. His face, which was backed by light, was blocked by the shadow, so Daughtry couldn't see him well. Well then. But it was clear that the person was looking at him while smiling. Let's finish our conversation. Chapter 55, Crimson Snake in the Mud 2. Ainz, who had run away under cover of darkness, crouched still outside the door of the bar and waited for the fight inside to end. There was no reason for him to step up in fighting the Crimson Society with Ludger. Even though he looked like a werewolf, he didn't know how to fight. The sight of a ferocious werewolf with black fur and a height of over 2 m sitting still was a strange sight that could only be seen in a dream. Oh, Ainz, who was listening to the situation inside with his ears pricked up, eventually got up from his spot. So it's over. The sound of blows being exchanged from the fight inside stopped as silence subsided. The last thing he heard was the pained scream of the Crimson Snake, Daughtry, the leader of the Crimson Society. Maybe he was being tortured for Ludger to get the information he needed or something like that. When even that sound stopped, it meant it was all over. As expected, when he entered the bar, he smelled the thick smell of blood. Arg. Ainz, who had become more sensitive to smell as he had the shape of a wolf, clicked his tongue and moved carefully so as not to step on the corpses. Ludger sat on the front bar, sipping liquor quietly from a transparent glass. Is everything over? Yeah, Ludger replied without looking back. How about both of the semi-knights under my feet? Ainz was surrounded by corpses. Ainz decided not to ask exactly what had happened. Arg. I'm going crazy because I'm sensitive to the smell while I'm maintaining myself in this form. Ainz immediately inserted the drug ampoule given by Ludger into his forearm. Shoot. His swollen body shrunk, and he returned to his human form. Then Ainz quickly put on his already prepared coat. He shuddered at the dreary sight of his surroundings. You are so awesome. You can drink liquor in this kind of place? I'm just getting used to it. More than that, what kind of liquor is that? The smell seems like it's very good. Even though he had returned to human form, his sense of smell, which became a little more sensitive due to the influence of his transformation, picked up the smell of Ludger's liquor. The scent was quite sweet. The liquor in Ludger's glass itself was so clean that there were no foreign matters, so the flavor looked quite strong. It must have been a pretty expensive liquor. It's said to be from the 38th year of Gorgon Mountain. Oh, that precious liquor, you mean? Damn it, please give me some as well. Wasn't your stomach upset? Even if I throw up because I am disgusted by my surroundings, I should drink it. Ludger handed over the liquor bottle, and Ainz took a moderate, empty cup and poured the liquor into it for himself as well. A shabby bar full of corpses, where the smell of blood and alcohol was strangely intertwined, the two men sat side by side and drank together. So, are you sure that you killed Daughtry? I haven't killed him yet, because I won't have anything to use on him after pulling the important information from him. Indeed. Now that you have a new place here and moved your dwelling, what's that again? There's something you told me before. Did you say that you're here to give out rice cakes? Yes. I don't know what the hell it means to give out rice cakes, but I suppose that it's something like greeting people in a good way since you just moved in, right? TL/N. The meaning of giving out rice cakes is exactly like Ainz supposed it to be. Since it's Korean people's tradition to give out rice cakes when they just moved houses. You guessed it exactly right. The Crimson Society has been dominating them and building their society up with a notorious reputation. If you get rid of the society, the other organizations will really love it. Of course, he had not yet eliminated all of the Crimson Society. As they dominated that big city, of course, the total number of their people was well over 1,000. But not all 1,000 of those Crimson Society members were complete members. Rather, the 100 people who had gathered in the bar were the key figures. Now that the head of their organization is gone, the rest of them are practically destroyed. What are you going to do? Are you going to assimilate all the small fry? No, Ludger shook his head. The organization could not be maintained properly, even if the number of its people was increased with useless mongrels. I will just use the few people who are needed. Of course, I'll need the guys who will be subcontracted, but not all of them. Pick people who are smart enough and have a good personality. You're telling me to go around a little bit. Hands, I'm done with everything I can do. The rest of the data will be in their office upstairs, and their papers and secret ledgers will be all there, so you can look at those and proceed with your task. Oh my, I will be busy again, Hands sighed. Hands had worked really hard for a couple of days to get information, collect data, and organize it. Ludger had completed all the necessary processes in just one night. Of course, it was possible because Ludger was so great, but Hands felt it to be a little unfair. No. I chose not to walk on a safe path and not risk my life, so I can't complain about it. Of course, he had to take risks when collecting dangerous information, but it was possible for him to borrow the power of his unusual physical type for that. That was why he thought Ludger was even greater. Otherwise, there would be no reason for Hands to honor him and follow him everywhere other than that. But even after our hideout is decided, there's no one else but you and me, right? What are you going to do about that? If there's no one else, we should increase the number. Increase the number, you said, but a little while ago you said no one should come in. I'm not talking about any Tom, Dick, and Harry. Hands, you must know it as well. There are several people I know. Ah, Hands immediately crumpled up at Ludger's remark. Are you sure? Why are you like that? Why, you said, that's because... Ah, now that I think about it, your relationship with them is bad. More than not having a bad relationship, it's a bit like... Hands hesitated because he knew who the people I know that Ludger was trying to refer to were. Of course, they were definitely skilled in each of their fields, and their skill was good enough to be mentioned by Ludger himself. However, if there was a problem, would it be that they didn't have responsible personalities? No, by the way, will those extremely stubborn people really come? They won't budge, no matter what I say to them, though. I already sent them letters. Unexpectedly, they said they were going to come after finishing their work. Erg. Hands kept grumbling until he emptied his glass, seemingly uncomfortable just by thinking about them. Do you hate them that much? It's not that I don't like them, it's more like I feel uncomfortable about them. There aren't any normal people among them. Well, even though I shouldn't be saying that with my body as it is. Come and read on our website, Wuxia World site. Thanks. Can't you just get along with them? Fee, I think you're saying that because you don't know, but how can I get along with them when they all have the same bullshit personality? Some of them used to treat me like I was some kind of experiment. Is that so? Yes, of course, yes. They're a little meek when you're around, but I might really die if you disappear. Are you still going to be here? I'm busy maintaining my Ludger identity right now. That's exactly it. Every time you're away as a Surin professor, have you ever thought about how much of my blood dries up? That's your own business. Will you die because of it, though? Of course, he wouldn't die, but he might be all stressed right before he almost died. Hands sighed. It was a reality that had already happened to Ludger. Now that I think about it, there's indeed no one else who can do this kind of nasty job as well as they do. Because they're so talented. It was one of them that had done such a great job in creating all of the equipment that Ludger still used. More than that, are you going to be all right? What do you mean? Are you a Surin professor for now? Besides, wasn't it a bit dangerous because you showed your real face this time, unlike your previous identities? Yes, that's also why I was moving like this. You said they somewhat suspected you, though. Then is it okay for you to just walk around outside like this? It was that part that Hands was worried about. If Surin suspected him, shouldn't Ludger refrain from going out to the city? Moreover, as their opponent was a wizard, their opponent might be secretly monitoring him through any methods. He obviously needed to move with caution in doing everything. You don't have to be worried about that. Are you sure? Isn't your opponent a wizard? Hands, what do you think a wizard is? What is a wizard? If they use magic, then they're a wizard. But if I have to answer that question, a very rational and cool-headed seeker. Something like that. You are close. Just as you said, wizards are quite rational. No, I think they need to be rational. They won't tolerate the slightest of mistakes. It was essential to have a calm mind for a wizard to cast their magic. Of course, wizards could not be free from all mistakes, because they were human beings. However, it was the basic tenet of a wizard to do their best to reduce mistakes in whatever they could. Especially because the higher the wizard's rank, the more they should be careful of mistakes. The principal is a 6th-rank wizard. Moreover, she's smart as well. I understand your concern because she is suspicious of me. But are you okay even after that? Let's say the principal is suspicious of me and keeps her eyes on me. Let's say it like that. And what if I notice that? If I argued with that, saying, "Why did you secretly watch me? What do you think she would do as the principal?" Hands became silent and was unable to quickly answer. She was supposed to be tracking Ludger secretly without getting caught, but what if she got caught? Wouldn't that be a pretty bad situation? What if she said, "I was suspicious of you shamelessly"? Can she just not get caught? It's not certain for her not to be caught. But the possibility of getting caught might exist. Hands, what are you going to consider in this case? I'm sure it's the latter. If she's really not sure that she won't get caught, then she shouldn't mess up with you. Her opponent is a Surins professor, and his real skills are not well known. If she tails such a target recklessly and gets caught, she'll be in a lot of trouble, no matter if she's the principal or not. So it's better to just not tail you rather than having to suffer loss by doing it. Wizards are like that. Besides, I've shown good performance as a professor so far. If she makes a mistake here and disappoints me, she will be quite embarrassed as the principal. A principal that couldn't trust the professor and tailed him, that fact alone would put the principal in a bad position. Of course, considering the personality of the principal, she would prepare as much safety as possible. But she was already defeated the moment she even considered that as a possibility. The principal's position? Even the principal can't do anything she wants at the moment. There are opposing factions and not all professors follow her. She has to be more careful the more those kinds of factions exist because her position is just like that. Aha, I see. So you don't mind moving around freely like this by using that chance? Of course, I'll get caught if I act too explicitly because the tail that's long is bound to be stepped on. That's why Ludger managed his image as a professor and made sure he strengthened his internal stability. Thanks to that, even if he went out freely, the principal would not track him or follow him, even if she is a little suspicious of him. Especially when there was a conflict between the aristocracy and the common people like there had been that day that had caused Surin to become noisy. I understand, so I don't have to worry about it right now. Of course. So if we all get together and form an organization, have you decided what to name it? Name? Aren't you and I going to move and live in Leathervelk? Then we should definitely name the organization. Well, even if we're going to get rid of our organization's rank and stuff, would the atmosphere be alive without a name? You make a good point. Dribble. After pouring all the liquor into the empty glass, the bottle was empty before he knew it. He was disappointed because it was a luxurious drink and it tasted good. The liquor was still full just then. How many people in total will be gathering? Including you and me, it's about 6 or 7. Small. Of course, the number is ridiculously insufficient to form an organization. But more people will come in. Maybe if we add a few more people, 10 people won't be bad. 10 people. It's adequate. So have you decided on the name? Name, huh? Ludger suddenly remembered a famous original novel and poem that had the same name that he had seen in his previous life. He had read it a long time ago, but it was such a famous novel that he still remembered it clearly. There was a character in the novel, a person who suppressed people's sinful acts and judged those who could not be dealt with by law. Someone who eventually got rid of himself. The organization's name is unknown. What's this? Did you just change the meaning of the word unknown with a pun? Yeah, I like the accent. Thus, the new organization that Ludger would create was named One More Glass. Yes, clink. In celebration of the birth of the new organization, Ludger and Hands shared a toast. lightly bumping their last remaining glass. Inside that alley, it was a night in a bloody bar. Chapter 56, Assistant Professor Recruitment 1. The day after the open duel, I'm tired. Aiden staggered along the corridor. His footsteps seemed almost like a zombie's. Even then, as soon as the class was over, some students approached him and talked to him or pretended to be close to him. The excessive interest of other students was too burdensome for Aiden, and it was to the point that it rather made him have a sour stomach. Uwag, why did it become like this? That's because you did your best in front of everyone. Are you stupid? Leo, who heard Aiden talking to himself, scolded him with an incredulous expression. Is that so? Phew, you're completely oblivious to this kind of thing, I see. Leo sighed when he realized that Aiden was being sincere. Aiden scratched his head awkwardly. Aiden had the type of personality where he wouldn't want to brag about how good he was in the first place. He was the person who had entered Surin purely because he liked magic rather than having a determination to succeed as a wizard. There weren't many people like that in Surin. It was not enough for you to win the magic duel against an aristocrat in the first place. You even used a strange spell to remove the opponent's magic, so of course, it'd be weird if you didn't get any attention. Is that so? Aiden, what on earth was the spell you used back then? Tessie, who was walking a step closer than usual next to Aiden, couldn't resist her curiosity. Her eyes showed a strong will to find out the spell Aiden had used. Aiden hesitated to reply as he saw her burdensome gaze. Oh, it's just something I learned when I was young. It's nothing much. Nothing much, you said? Hey, if that's nothing much, then what are we? Right, a spell that removed the other's spell. I've never heard of such a thing. Don't beat around the bush and answer us quickly. Aiden hesitated to answer. That was because his teacher strictly warned him not to reveal the spell recklessly. That was why he had desperately avoided answering the persistent questions of other students. Although he had been told by his teacher that he didn't mind him telling those he could really trust, is it really okay? Aiden contemplated for a moment. Tessie and Leo, both of them were precious friends he had made there in Surin. He didn't think that there would be a mix of political calculations in their relationship, because they had been close even before he used anti-magic. Suddenly he remembered what his teacher had said: you'll always have to make choices throughout your life. In that case, follow your heart. Follow his heart. The teacher himself spoke about it lightly, but Aiden had never forgotten that lesson. Aiden made his decision. All right, I'll tell you. Oh, really? Tessie was rather surprised when Aiden answered their question seriously. In fact, she was indeed pushing him too hard when she asked him, but she didn't expect much from Aiden, as she saw him keep his mouth shut to the persistent questions of the other students even after the class was over. She thought Aiden might have his own circumstances that wouldn't let him tell it to the others, so she was just going to poke him about the matter. That was why she didn't expect him to give her that kind of answer. Let's move to a quiet place for now. The three then headed to Rose Park, a place that students did not visit often. Rose Park was filled with a gentle scent under the dazzling sun. Aiden was contemplating what to say as he was sitting on a secluded bench in a park full of colorful, beautiful, full-bloom roses. How to start telling you about the spell. Then, when he thought that it was good to talk from the beginning, he opened his mouth. What I used is anti-magic. It's a spell to get rid of another spell. I understand that since I already saw it. So it's called anti-magic, huh? There was an opposite reaction between Leo and Tessie. Aiden smiled awkwardly and continued. And it was my teacher, a wandering wizard, who taught me this spell, but he said that I'm currently the only one who can actually use anti-magic. What? Why? I heard that it can only be used by people with a unique physical type. I didn't know about it either, but my teacher said so. It's only possible if the person has a unique physical type. Who is that teacher? What Tessie and Leo were most curious about was Aiden's teacher. Who the hell was that wandering wizard to teach him anti-magic? It would be strange if he hadn't publicized himself anywhere if he was that talented. I don't know either, Aiden responded while scratching his cheek with his forefinger. What? Is that even possible? Aiden held out his hands and made a hasty excuse as he saw Tessie and Leo's sharp gazes. No, it's for real. When I first met my teacher, I was so young that I was only 8 years old. It was more than 10 years ago. 10 years. And he's free-spirited and someone who's hard to understand, so I don't know where and what he's doing now, either. I also can't contact him. He disappeared like the wind when he left, so I didn't have time to ask him about his name. What? Then it means you don't know whether he's currently alive or dead. But considering his skills, he must be living well somewhere. I think so. They couldn't believe he had such a calm response after being left by the teacher who taught him the extraordinary spell of anti-magic. Tessie was about to say something about Aiden's behavior, but she shut her lips. She unconsciously accepted the fact that he could be like that because he was Aiden. Tessie had a surge of frustration. I want to know everything about Aiden, though. Suddenly, Tessie realized that she was overly interested in Aiden. No, I can't believe I have an interest in him. The only important thing to me is reviving my family. Tessie immediately cleared her distracting thoughts and shook her head violently from side to side. Her red hair that was tied in pigtails also shook in tune with her head. It's just curiosity, simply a mere curiosity. Yes, just that. Leo, who was listening to Aiden while Tessie felt troubled inside, raised a question. More than that, it's amazing. No matter how it happened 10 years ago, the anti-magic that you use is not well known. Maybe it's because the spell is so rare. The rarer the spell, the more famous it is. People are curious about that which is hard to come by. Moreover, if the spell can delete other spells. Anti-magic clearly had no killing power. Compared to other spells, anti-magic itself certainly seemed to do less. However, when fighting against a wizard, anti-magic showed a ridiculous performance just by its appearance. Aiden, that anti-magic, does it work regardless of the spell tiers? I don't really know about that either. Honestly, it was my first time using it properly. I'd never used it like that before. Didn't your teacher tell you about that? He never explained it in much detail because my teacher's personality isn't like that. Besides, I just liked learning magic at the time, so I just learned it without thinking. Fee, Leo sighed as he listened to Aiden's answer. It was a collaboration between an irresponsible and secretive teacher who didn't explain anything and an immature little countryside child who thought nothing would matter as long as he would be able to learn the spell because he liked magic. But Leo, why did you ask me that? Come and read on our website, Wuxia World site. Thanks, just because I think I heard something a long time ago. Heard something? Your teacher, you don't know his name either, right? Haha. Yeah, I didn't ask his name. Maybe he told me his name, but I don't remember it. Maybe it's right that he didn't tell you his name. It bothers me that you haven't heard from someone like that in the last 10 years. If he's that talented, it'd be no wonder if they put his name on a page in a newspaper. Is that so? Aiden was an outsider to that kind of thing, so he couldn't answer properly. I think it's because you're not aware of it yet, but anti-magic is a spell that can definitely cause a fuss just by its existence, especially to the whole magic world. But the other students didn't seem to know much about it. That means it was that secretive. It's hard for students who are currently learning magic to know about it. Well, something like that. Then Tessie, who was only listening, stepped in. But if that's the case, didn't the professors know about it? If they didn't know about it, the professors wouldn't have left Aiden when he was attacked. Some of the professors also reacted as if they were seemingly surprised. They knew about anti-magic, but it was the first time they saw someone actually using it. Did you check their reactions amidst the attack? Leo nodded. When everyone had sat in the audience seat and watched Aiden using anti-magic with blank faces, Leo had focused on the audience's reactions. Among them, several people had reacted naturally, as if they knew it would happen from the beginning. People who knew about anti-magic, knew that Aiden used it, and were not surprised to see it in front of their eyes. First of all is the principal. The principal. Well, the principal is a great woman, so she obviously knew. Anyone else? There was also Hugo and Mary Ross, who seemed to have been working as a professor for a long time. Other than those people, the new professors didn't seem to know about it. But, Professor Ludger Chelsea was different. Professor Ludger Chelsea? Yeah, Professor Ludger responded naturally, as if he had known about Ainz's anti-magic from the beginning. Ainz suddenly remembered Ludger's appearance that day. Ainz always thought that Ludger was a person who merely had a less expressive face, but when he thought about it, his attitude that had remained the same even though he used anti-magic was somewhat strange. Maybe Professor Ludger knew a little about the anti-magic that Ainz used. He knew it, you said? If he knew about it, then to what extent? I don't know that much, but this is just a guess. He may have some connection with Ainz's teacher. Then Tessie stepped up and refuted. No matter how hard I think about it, it's a really wild guess. Did you ever think that Professor Ludger didn't know much about it, but he didn't want to make it seem obvious in the first place? It's you who doesn't know about it, Tessie. What? Think about it. Why on earth did Professor Ludger treat Ainz so well? Treat him well, you said. Tessie frowned at Leo's words. Have you forgotten about it? When he was teaching about the elemental properties, Professor Ludger praised Ainz. Well, that's because Ainz did well. That cold-blooded man. Haven't you seen Flora Lumos? It was Professor Ludger who bombarded that genius with hard truths and harsh words. It was true when she thought about it, and the important thing is what happened next. Do you remember the bet that Professor Ludger made with Professor Chris? I obviously remember that. Professor Ludger bet on Ainz winning the duel then without the slightest bit of doubt. Don't you think it's strange? Until then, Ainz had been an ordinary student whom he didn't know much about. That's what made Professor Ludger so sure that Ainz would win against the aristocratic student. And why did he teach Ainz moving magus while using his own personal time? The more Leo spoke, the less Tessie was able to say anything. It was because the more she heard him speak, the more right he seemed to be. I checked and found out that moving magus is a real-life battle technique used only by special people in the military. They said that Professor Ludger served as a military officer. It's exactly that. The lessons that he learned in the military, being a military officer, he knew about anti-magic to some extent. I found a connection there. What's that? Tessie asked. Ainz waited for Leo's next words, intrigued by his speculation. Maybe Professor Ludger knew something about your teacher, Professor Ludger. But how? I don't know the details, of course, but that's my assumption. Professor Ludger must have met your teacher when he was an active military officer. If that's the case, then the pieces of the puzzle match. Your teacher is not famous and is secretive, even though he had that many abilities, because he's from a secret army unit that shouldn't be known. Leo was inwardly convinced that his deduction was almost correct. Ainz tilted his head a little bit as he heard that. The teacher he knew was a man similar to a soldier who was thorough in discipline and always restrained, so to speak, just like Ludger. However, the teacher in his memory was not a soldier, but rather more like a free man akin to the wind. No, if he's from a secret army unit, he might be different from a regular soldier. In some way, Ainz thought Leo's guess might be right. Does Professor Ludger know about my teacher? Considering the behavior he showed you, I think it's possible. There's no way he'd be nice to you otherwise. Maybe both of them were close to each other. Ludger was not only naturally accepting of Ainz's anti-magic, but also Ludger, who was unlikely to pay attention to others, had spent time teaching Ainz how to do moving magus. Leo's words were certainly convincing. Then, if you ask Professor Ludger, will he tell you about your teacher? Ainz contemplated for a moment at Tessie's question and shook his head. No, never mind. We're still not certain yet. Besides, I don't want to bother Professor Ludger again. I already gained a lot of help from him. Well, as long as you think so. Then, as the conversation was about to be ended, Tessie opened her mouth as she seemingly recalled something. More than that, have you guys heard about the rumor? Rumor? What rumor? Well, I was eating with fellow new professors who had just joined the academy. Most of all, they were fellow colleagues who had entered the academy in the same period as me, and it was essential for me to maintain the least amount of personal connections, no matter how lonesome I was. It was not a bothersome thing to do. While I sat still and ate quietly, the other teachers would ask for current news on their own and exchange news with each other. Professor Selena in particular liked to chat so much that she chatted non-stop while eating. Of course, she was not annoying or anything. Rather, Selena's behavior was like the life of the party. Still, I didn't pay much attention to the information that they were talking about because 10% of the information was of no importance. Among the 10 topics, only one topic piqued my interest. Ah, right. Professor Ludger didn't do that. However, the news was different from usual and was somewhat of an eye-opener for me. What do you mean by that? I looked back at Professor Selena and asked. You've been working alone all this time, collecting data, organizing textbooks, and even checking assignments, right? Right. Well, wasn't that the role and the job of a professor? As soon as I thought so, Professor Selena asked me innocently, "Why don't you have an assistant?" There was something like that, Chapter 57, Assistant Professor Recruitment, 2. When Professor Selena asked me that, I quietly put down my dish on the table and spoke. I haven't felt the need to do so yet. It was a lie. Actually, I didn't even know there was a professor assistant role. Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever seen other professors go around alone. Most professors had people around them. At that time, I didn't know they were professor assistants, and I had thought they were just students who followed the professor to ask personal questions, or an employee whom they ordered to do chores. So they were professor assistants, huh? Then, did everyone except me pick their own assistants and order them around, and only I didn't know that. Professor Selena was quite surprised by my answer. What? Then, so far, you have organized the assignments, student attendance, and materials for class preparation. I did it all by myself. Don't you feel tired? Had I felt tired due to it, it was certainly a little bothersome to guide nearly 80 students one by one, organize their data, and prepare the class contents by myself. The most difficult thing in particular in that matter was checking the homework submitted by the students one by one, but I shook my head because I didn't feel tired. It's not that tiring. I see. How many students did you have in your classroom? 80 people. It reached the maximum quota. The words caused breathtaking sounds from other professors who were eating together with me. So you alone have been in charge of 80 students since the semester started. Isn't it usually like that? It's not usually like that. Is that so? Yes. I see. Since I didn't look at the other professors deeply, they should have known that I did something wrong. Then did you pick an assistant as well, Professor Selena? Yes, but I didn't need a lot of helping hands, so I only picked 3 people. She said she didn't really need it, but she picked 3 assistants. Well, did the other people take 10 assistants with them? I skimmed my eyes around and suddenly found a professor passing by outside the restaurant. He was Chris Benimore, a professor who looked temperamental and hysterical. Since his defeat in the last bet, there had been 8 restless students behind Chris Benimore who had always been in a bad mood. There were a lot. I think you should take this opportunity to pick one assistant, too. Moreover, you said that there are 80 students who take your lectures, right? Then you'll need more than 5 assistants. I think so, too. Professor Merrilda also intervened in the conversation. It may be okay now, but you'll be exhausted after a while. Do I need it right away? You don't have to pick all of your assistants at once, but you can just increase the number little by little. I see. As they suggested that I pick assistants so much, I was also intrigued by it. In addition, looking at the reactions around me, it seemed that if I didn't have any assistants, I might attract the attention of others too much. First of all, it seemed necessary for me to select the right person in the near future. I understand. Then I'll try to pick an assistant as soon as possible. Since you are popular, if you post an official paper, there will be a lot of students who apply to do it. Thank you for the compliment, even if it's just a flattery. It's not flattery, though. Then since I'm done eating, I'll get going now. After I got up from my seat, I said goodbye and left the cafeteria. After I went back to the professor's office, I patted my chin while reading a collection of data on assistant recruitment. Even if I am a new professor, I can hire an assistant, and usually the professor will have more than 6 people. So indeed, I have to pick assistants. Well, there were indeed teachers and disciples among wizards, so it was expected in a magic academy. In the case of the magic tower alone, there were teachers in each school, and there were dozens of disciples under the school. Of course, they were closer to slaves who used the title of disciple as an excuse to be worked around as labor. But nominally, it was like that. The magic tower had established some kind of tradition themselves, and Surin, that taught magic, had also not escaped that influence. And surprisingly, Surin also had a university student system. Instead of relaxing for graduation after their 5th year, Surin's last-year students were studying magic and producing papers under their professor. Yes, frankly speaking, they were just like university students in the 21st century. What an innovative academy in both good and bad ways. Anyway, aside from that part, I don't feel the need to hire an assistant right away because there's nothing among my work that's beyond my capability, but it wouldn't be bad if there was one person who handled the chores. Surin wasn't a real magic tower anyway, but an academy, so I didn't have to worry about the security issue of someone robbing my magic data. I just needed them to organize the materials related to the class. Being an assistant basically gives them more credit, or they can get a more personal instruction from the professor. There was no obligation to pass on my magic. If there was such a treaty in the first place, the professors would have protested. After looking through the clause with my eyes, I crossed my legs and folded my hands. If I have to choose an assistant, I'd better choose a competent person. The simplest way to pick an assistant was to post an announcement. If I said I'd recruit a few assistants under my name, there would be applicants, and I'd sort them out. Basically, it was said that people who were about to graduate were the ones who usually did the assistant jobs, but there was no particular age limit. New professors focused on picking the first and second-year students who took their classes instead. Should I choose the students who take my class? If I chose an assistant among the students who took my class, then they would be given the role of the class president in my lecture only. Then I needed someone who could lead and give directions to the students well. There were indeed some people who came to my mind. First of all, both of them were high-ranking nobles and royalty, and they had their own charisma, so they were good at setting the mood. However, those two won't want to be my assistants. First of all, I honestly criticized Flora Lumos quite a lot, so it would be hard to pick her as my assistant. And in the case of the princess, Elendil, I felt more uncomfortable. No way I could order a princess to become an assistant. No matter how Surin claimed equality of their student status, it was still too much. Even if she told me that she wanted to do it wholeheartedly, I would have had to say no. Should I postpone the selection after all? I know the students will come by themselves if I post an official announcement properly, but it still takes a little bit of time. I don't want to pick students who haven't been verified. If I had to pick someone, it would be much better if it was someone that I felt comfortable ordering around. I decided to go back to the accommodation for the moment because the answer wouldn't come even if I contemplated about it. After coming out of the professor's room wearing an overcoat, I suddenly felt a familiar sense of presence, so I stopped my footsteps while walking in the hallway. Sedna. Why, yes. Sedna Rachin, who was hiding in the corner of the hallway, jumped out in surprise. As she was still looking at me in awe, she seemed to have been secretly waiting for me. Doesn't she have any tasks? Do you have any businesses with me? And no, it's not like that. She looked restless for fear of being scolded by me. I was going to tell her to go back then, but I thought of her point of view for a moment and opened my mouth. Is that so? You came at a perfect time. Pardon? You should become my assistant. Yes, yes, Sedna nodded reflexively. And 5 seconds afterwards, pardon? Sedna shouted out in astonishment. Come and read on our website, Wuxia World site. Thanks, I had just said a couple of words, but her response was so extreme. You don't want it. If you don't want it, I won't force you to do it. It's not like that, ouch. Sedna bit her tongue when she hastily said no to me. Her appearance when she was covering her mouth with both of her hands seemed like a real squirrel. Then will you say yes? Nod, nod. Sedna shook her head violently up and down, unable to open her mouth. I'm glad that you want to do it. There's still some time left, so fill out the assistant application form and come to my office. Are you sure? Are you sure it's okay for me to be your assistant? There's no reason for you not to be, or do I have a reason to lie? And no, the deadline is 2 days, remember it. I spoke those last words to Sedna and left. As a member of the Black Dawn Society, based on her performance until then, she was specialized in gathering information. If I kept her near me, I'd have more opportunities to find out about the Black Dawn Society. Rather than setting a place and time to make contacts every time, working as a professor and assistant made it much easier to get in touch. Above all, she would be able to erase the suspicious gaze of the third party. Choosing her wasn't a bad choice. First of all, Sedna is already confirmed. The rest can be chosen slowly in the future. I found a faithful slave faster than I thought a few days after the open duel between Aiden and Felio. The story of the duel that day still lingered among the students, but as usual, they wanted to find new gossip rather than an outdated story. And that time, the students' chatter was enough to attract everyone's attention. "Oh, my, aren't people more noisy than usual?" Lynn asked Elendil comfortably as the third princess was sitting next to her. Although the difference between the status of an imperial woman and a commoner was far away, they were able to get closer faster than anyone else because they had no close friends, and neither of them cared about such trivial things. "Ah, you came, Lynn. I think there's a strange rumor going around among our fellow students these days." "Strange rumor?" "Yeah, they're talking about Professor Ludger recruiting assistants." "Whoa, that's a little tempting." It was a quite popular issue among students that Ludger Chelsea had not chosen any assistants so far. Considering that most professors must choose an assistant, it was quite unusual for a new professor not to choose a single assistant. As a joke, it was even said that Ludger might not have known that he actually had to have an assistant. Of course, there is no way that Professor Ludger would be like that. It didn't occur to her that such a thorough man would have a weakness there. The students were just joking as well. If Ludger said he would choose an assistant, the front of Professor Ludger's office would probably be crowded with students shouting for him to pick them. If it was Ludger, who seemed to hate noisy and annoying things, he might not have chosen an assistant simply because he didn't like it. But the hottest rumor is something else. Something else? What else is there? "Yeah, have you heard of the 7 Legends of Surin?" "7 Legends? No, I haven't heard about it." Lynn was an outsider in that matter, so she couldn't answer properly. "Ah, so you don't know?" "Oh, yes. I don't really know things like that." "Well, that's obvious as well. The 7 Legends are just a rumor in the first place. However, that was why students were more enthusiastic. Surin's 7 Legends. One of them was that, somewhere in this academy, there was a dungeon hidden by the founder and first principal of Surin, the so-called Forefather Room. Another famous legend was that there was a beautiful flower tree that always fulfilled the wish of people who confessed their feelings there. That's probably the most buzzing topic right now. What is it? The omnipotent stone that makes one's wish come true. Lynn thought she had mistakenly heard something for a moment as she listened to Elendil's words. There was a stone that makes our wishes come true. There's a rumor that the stone exists somewhere in Surin. Pardon? Really? Lynn felt strange at those words. Is there really a stone that makes our wishes come true? Seeing Lynn's reaction, Elendil lifted her forefinger and shook it from side to side. You don't know much, I see. Oh, what? There are so many unknown mysteries in the world that have yet to be revealed. Monsters and demons that existed in ancient times, cryptids that are still scattered all over the world, secret ruins, and even unknown gods. Elendil's eyes were burning with curiosity toward the unknown as she said so. In a world like that, there is no way that the mysterious stone doesn't exist in Surin, which is the center of all magic. Of course, it's impossible for the stone to be omnipotent or grant any wish, but I'm sure it's an artifact with corresponding power. Oh, yes. Lynn was inwardly confused by Elendil's unusual appearance. She didn't know that Elendil, who maintained her dignity as a princess and always acted aloof from the others, had that kind of hobby. In addition, she might be quite serious with her hobby, given that once she had fallen into it, she didn't care about the reactions around her at all. You know of such things quite well, I see. Ah, sorry, I have pretty invested in this kind of thing. It's a bit too much, right? And no. You look even better instead. Lynn thought Elendil's appearance shone in a fresh way. If it was outside Surin, she would have been far too high for them to even make eye contact. The princess, who was always aloof and confident and had to shake off her charisma in front of everyone, was actually a person with personal tastes, just like everyone else. There was absolutely no reason to look at it in a bad way. Anyway, Surin became noisy because of the omnipotent stone. Ah, so that's why. Besides Lynn and Elendil, all of the students were also talking about the omnipotent stone. HMPH. Omnipotent stone, huh? I can't listen to it because it's too childish. Flora Lumos snorted inwardly while eavesdropping on the students. If there was such an omnipotent stone in this world, the adults would have already taken it before it entered into students' ears. If such an object existed in the first place, it should have been taken at the national level. In the end, the omnipotent stone was just a false rumor that had been born on its own as people gathered. She couldn't believe they truly trust in that legend. Could they be called wizards like that? When she saw the students talk about it after school, she even felt embarrassed that they were the same Surin students as her. Well, I can just mind my own business. What Flora cared about was the news about Ludger that was sometimes being talked about instead. He's choosing an assistant. Professor Ludger. She couldn't believe that such a thoroughly superhuman guy was choosing an assistant. Of course, he could pick an assistant because he was a professor, but when she heard that he was going to pick one, she wondered who he would pick. In the case of professor's assistant, they usually represent the image of a professor, so a person who lacks the skill won't do it. If it was a professor like Ludger, the assistant should have the skills to match him. If she had to say it, it was someone like her. Ah, really? What kind of thought is this? Flora shook her head. She couldn't believe she considered herself to be Ludger's assistant. That was too much. It would be a different case if Ludger asked her to be his assistant directly. Well, if he does that, I have nothing to be worried about. They just said that he was going to pick someone, but there was no way that he would pick them right away, so it wouldn't be bad to look at the progress over time. As she was thinking that way, the front door of the classroom opened and a girl student came in. What? All the people's eyes were focused on the student. She had a small body and voluminous, brown, bobbed hair. That girl did not care about the gazes of other students and put the data that she held in her arms on the podium. The professor is coming soon, so please be quiet. Flora's face became blank at her daring, soft voice. He already picked an assistant? Chapter 58, Assistant Professor Recruitment, 3. I gave Sedna Rachin 2 days. Until then, I told her that she could slowly submit the application form to become a professor's assistant. But to overshadow my words, Sedna neatly finished the application form an hour later and came back to me. She was gasping for breath from running so quickly. I accepted it with a blank face because I didn't expect her to want to be my assistant that much. And Sedna was appointed as my assistant through a formal process. And the next day in my class, I handed Sedna the class material and told her to go first and put it on the podium, and then she went slowly on her way to the classroom. First of all, I need to show my students who my assistant is. Sedna was very thorough and smart with others, even if she looked weak and delicate. Rather, she often showed her vigilance against others, and I guessed it might be related to the reason why she entered the Black Dawn Society. She was only acting weird in front of me, as she had mistaken me for the First Order. I didn't know if I should like that part or not, but it made it easy for me to order her around. I guess I should go in now. Esraak. When I opened the door of the classroom and entered, Sedna, who was standing on the podium, saw me and hurriedly bowed to me. Good job. Yes, yes. With only one word spoken by me, Sedna's body shuddered with emotion and she left the classroom. I naturally climbed onto the platform and glanced at the students. Their reaction is somewhat strange. Flora Lumos's gaze in particular was most noticeable amongst the students. She clenched her teeth and stared at me with a sharp gaze to avoid showing her feelings, but for a moment, I thought I had become a sinner. I ignored her gaze and looked at the other students' reactions. Maybe because it's been a while since the school started, but some students' gazes are starting to change. Some students had spied on each other and hid themselves at the beginning of the semester. Was it the end of their investigation? The spirit of some students had changed considerably compared to the beginning of the class. The reason for that was probably Aiden. Oh, huh? Aiden's body shuddered as he felt my gaze. The open duel between Aiden and Jevanfelio had been enough to stir up the calm atmosphere in Surin. There was also a werewolf case before, but the blatant confrontation between commoners and aristocratic students must have been the decisive factor. It was not necessarily Aiden's fault. That was bound to happen one day, and Aiden just happened to take the lead in making it happen. It was not a lucky occurrence for him in some ways. Whatever one would call it, it was true that there was a new wind blowing in Surin. It was about time for the students affected by the wind to start showing their true colors. If there was a problem, no one knew whether the wind would flow in a good direction or not. That's probably why the classroom is so noisy right now. Whether they were surprised or amazed by the fact that the professor had picked an assistant, they were glaring at me. Looking at their various reactions, I thought that they were students after all. Quiet. The students who were talking among themselves became silent at my word. In the end, all the fuss was a matter between the students. It meant that I didn't have to care about it. Let's start the lesson. A professor should just do good in their class. That's all. What you learned today will be in the next exam, so be sure to review it when you get back. After a 2-hour class ended, having given a simple assignment to the students, I organized the teaching materials and was about to leave the classroom. Professor Ludger, I have a question. At that time, one of the students raised her hand and spoke up. It was a principle that a professor shouldn't refuse personal questions, even after class, but it was the first time that someone asked me questions like that. Why? Until then, everyone had just looked at me and couldn't even think about approaching me. What are you curious about? First of all, since there was nothing I couldn't answer, I asked the student who raised her hand. The first thing I saw was white hair that resembled the snow. It was the same color as the perpetual snow that I saw in the northern Arret Mountains before I reached the Exilian Empire. The moment I saw the distinctive hair color, I remembered her name, Julia Plumhart. Oh my, so you remember my name, because you are a student who attends my class. Julia Plumhart, a woman with white hair, pale skin, and a strange atmosphere that made people feel like they would freeze just by getting closer to her. But she had a captivating yet subtle smile all the time. To put it bluntly, it was a somewhat dark smile. However, if I had to pick the most memorable reason for why I remembered her, it was because she was the top first-year student who had been first ranked in Surin's entrance exam. Not only that, but she was an unrivaled rookie that the Magic Tower supported and had expectations for. Before this, she was just taking my classes calmly. This is surprising. I was just trying not to make it obvious, but I couldn't believe she had a question. So, what are you curious about? If it was a question from a rookie whom the tower supported, was it something related to magic? I stood still and waited for Julia's question. How did you pick your assistant? I was wondering what she was curious about, so it was related to the professor's assistant. There was no reason why I couldn't answer that. I looked and picked her by myself. You have any qualifications, then? For example, they have to be skillful enough at magic for them to be suitable for becoming your assistant. All the students stared at me curiously after hearing her words. Julia's question seemed to be just out of pure curiosity, but it wasn't. Her intention was to pierce through Ludger. He had suddenly picked an assistant, but was he sure that she had the suitable ability? Her question was implicitly interrogating him. Or, well, do they have to be from a famous place where people can tell who they are just by hearing their name? When Ludger didn't answer her, Julia asked a more explicit question. That was the intention of the question, after all. Did he gain something from his assistant? Her subtle attack might be offensive to some people, but Ludger just stared at Julia with calm eyes. Soon, when everyone's attention was focused on him, his mouth opened. When I pick someone as my assistant, there is only one thing that I see in them. What's that? Personality. Julia was at a loss for words at his very confident answer. I don't see class, status, or honor when I see or pick someone. I only see their personality. I chose my current assistant because she has a suitable personality. Then you don't consider anything else at all when you pick your assistant? Yes. I welcome anyone as long as they have a suitable personality. We'll have a basic inquiry session. Ludger said so and gave Julia a warning. However, you don't seem to be suitable for becoming my assistant." Julia's face, which had been smiling, changed as she had been criticized. What he said indirectly meant that she had a bad personality. Ludger looked around at the other students without looking at Julia's reaction. "Is there anyone else who wants to ask me a question?" "Ah, here." Ludger's eyes turned to where the sound came from. It was Aiden, Leo, and Tessie. It seemed that Leo was the one who spoke, but it was Aiden who looked confused. "What are you curious about, Aiden? Come and read on our website, Wuxia World site." "Thanks, oh, pardon? Weren't you curious about something and wanted to ask me a question?" Aiden hesitated to answer Ludger's question. It was obviously Leo who had raised his hand. But suddenly, the attention passed to him. Leo slapped Aiden on the shoulder next to him, saying, "Cheer up," with the movement of his mouth. But instead of blaming Leo, Aiden thought that it was a chance to ask Ludger a question. But the question that came out of his mouth was of a way different topic. "Have you heard the rumor about a stone that listens to people's wishes?" Aiden said it himself, and he wondered what a silly question it was. He was so confused that his brain went blank, so he just said anything without thinking. He had originally been intending to ask about his teacher, though. Tessie and Leo, who were cheering Aiden from next to him, also stared at Aiden with expressions like, "What are you doing all of a sudden?" "I heard it." The students showed disbelief on their faces as if saying, "He answered this kind of question." "I heard it, but I want to say that it's a false rumor. Don't tell me that you're a student in my class, yet you really believe in such false rumors." No one could answer the question, because everyone knew that he didn't really ask the question out of curiosity. When you have time to care about such rumors, use it to sharpen your magic, if even a little bit. You know that the first evaluation day is coming soon, right? Ludger's voice, which turned even heavier, weighed down the entire classroom. The first evaluation exam, the examination hall where all the Surin students of every year faced the new semester. Those who don't produce the right results then will be considered to be distracted by rumors and not faithful to their studies. I'll know once I see the results. Some students gulped down at Ludger's last words. Does anyone else have any questions? If there's none, I'll be going. Ludger left the classroom at the end of his sentence. Sedna, who was waiting for Ludger with her back against the wall next to the door, welcomed him hastily when she saw him come out. "Ah, that you did good work for your class, PR professor. Have you been waiting here?" "Yes, somehow." "Next time, just wait comfortably in the assistant room. Don't uselessly waste your time here." "Ah, yes." Even after Sedna answered so, she nervously fiddled with her hand as she seemingly had something left to say to Ludger. "You have anything else to say?" "Oh, that." Ludger saw the reaction of Sedna Rochin and recalled Julia, who had asked him questions. "Is it something related to Julia Plumhart?" "And no, that's. Looking at your reaction, it seems that I'm right. Don't worry, I don't want to pry into your personal matters." "Yes." Sedna nodded with relief at Ludger's reply. "Take this." "Pardon?" "Ah." When Ludger handed over the pile of assignments he was holding, Sedna hastily reached out and accepted it. It was so sudden that she stumbled, but she managed to balance herself. "Sort them out until I get off work for today." Yes. Just answer once." "Yes." "All right." At that moment, the back door of the classroom opened, and a girl with long blue hair approached Ludger, Flora Lumos. Along with her appearance, Sedna stepped back while holding the pile of homework. "Flora Lumos, do you have any business with me?" I heard that Professor is picking assistants. As you can see, for now, I picked one person, but why are you asking me that question?" Flora Lumos wanted to ask Ludger about why he hadn't told her when he was picking an assistant. Then she belatedly realized what she was thinking. Oh my God. He would ask me why I didn't offer myself to be his assistant. Wouldn't it look like I was jealous? Flora thought that it was not her usual behavior. Looking at Flora, who kept grumbling inwardly and clenching her fists, then opening them, Ludger spoke apathetically. "Or do you have any intentions of applying as my assistant?" "And no. Why would I?" Flora unknowingly raised her voice and shouted. Belatedly recognizing her indecency, she covered her mouth with her hands, her white, jade cheeks flushed red. "Is that so? If you don't want it, then never mind." "And no, well, but the chance is always there. It doesn't matter if you apply after you change your mind. If it's you, then maybe it's possible. Ludger turned his back after speaking those words. Flora, who was left alone, stared blankly at Ludger's back as he went further beyond the corridor. It was possible if it was me, he said. What on earth did he mean by that? Flora clenched her fist tightly and chewed her lips. It's annoying. Either it was her caring about something trivial, or it was Ludger, whom she had been focused on since the first class. Flora was at a loss because she had no idea how it had happened. HMPA. Even so, she didn't reveal it outwardly. Because she always had to be haughty in Surin returning to his private professor's room, Ludger could not rest and had no choice but to get back out of his seat. Professor Ludger, would you mind coming to my room for a moment? It was because the principal herself had called Ludger in person. Why the hell? Ludger had no time to ask about it. Because the crystal ball turned off as soon as it was done with its business. Eventually, Ludger was forced to walk to the principal's office. He got on the elevator to the principal's office in the main building. Thus, Ludger reached the door across the corridor and knocked on it with his fingertips in a modest way. Knock, knock. It's Ludger Chelsea? Please, come in. The door opened along with the principal's voice. There was only the principal inside. Ludger naturally sat in an empty seat opposite of the principal. Why did you summon me? Professor Ludger, have you heard the rumor? It was not an answer, but a question in reply to his question. What did the rumor mean? The rumor about the omnipotent stone that makes people's wishes come true? Omnipotent stone, you said. Ludger nodded his head. I heard a bit of it. It seems that it's very popular among the students. I see. However, I didn't care much because I thought it was just a false rumor. Ah. So Professor Ludger thinks that it's a false rumor? The principal shook her head with a mysterious smile. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Sight only then she spat out a bombshell. In fact, an omnipotent stone that makes people's wishes come true really does exist. Chapter 59, Omnipotent Stone. 1. The omnipotent stone existed. Her words were so out of the blue that I was at a loss for a moment while contemplating what to say. Are you surprised? It's indeed unexpected. If the principal laughed and said, I'm kidding, I would have passed it by while thinking that it was just a superior's workplace joke. But judging from her reaction, I thought she was telling the truth. First of all, I'll need to explain about the omnipotent stone to you. The principal moved her fingers lightly as she said so. Her movement was too natural and light. But in the end, it wasn't like that. The enormous and vivid mana that was emanating from the principal's fingertips moved and formed a shape in front of me. It was obviously a hologram that was shaped like a stone in the air. I couldn't believe that mana could give shape to something like that. It was a surprising sight, but I controlled my expression and examined the shape of the embodied stone in detail. It was called an omnipotent stone, but it was more of a rough gem or gemstone than a regular stone. As you can see, this omnipotent stone exists, and it has been around for a very long time. It's an object that's existed for so long that it's hard to guess its age, but it still has unknown and mysterious power. There's a term in this world for this kind of object. A relic, I see. Relics, or, in other words, antique objects. The word referred to old objects with mysterious power. So you knew? Yes, because I've heard about them as well. Relics and artifacts were different. Artifacts were more of a magical handicraft that was artificially created for a particular effect, but relics weren't like that. Unknown identity, unknown year, unknown ability. Nobody had yet figured out who had made them, how they were made, or how they worked. And their effects or powers were at least 100 times more potent than the artifacts created by the great wizards. In some ways, they were second only to strategic weapons that required special maintenance for each of them. That was what a relic was. However, as they had great power, the number of relics was so extremely small that it was hard to find one in the entire continent. Such a relic existed in Surin. Since Professor Ludger must have heard something about it, it'll be easy for me to explain it. Yes. There was a relic called the Omnipotent Stone in Surin. It's been kept in Surin for a very long time, to be exact. Is that so? I nodded my head. Well, there was no reason for me to be surprised and say impossible when she was there. However, the problem was with why the principal had called me and told me the story. Wasn't it confidential no matter how you looked at it? I need your help, Professor Ludger. What is it? Currently, the rumor about the omnipotent stone is spreading amongst the students. It means that most people in Surin already know about it. I nodded my head, because that was what Aiden had asked me after class. At the time, I thought it was just a fake rumor and had scolded him to study hard instead. Who would have thought that it was real? I became embarrassed for some reason. Is there a problem with that? This rumor wasn't supposed to spread in the first place. So in the end, it was that. The fact that the rumors about the relic that were supposed to be kept a secret spread means that inside information was leaked out. So you mean someone didn't keep the secret properly? Yes. Well, there's one reason for that. The omnipotent stone is a relic with such an extremely powerful strength that the place it's stored in needs to be periodically touched up. To sum up what the principal said, it was like this. The omnipotent stone that listened to people's wishes. The relic itself was a stone that emitted a strong force. It was kept in a secret place that could not be seen by others, but whether it was a storage box or place, it couldn't do its role properly because of the strength that was emitted by the relic itself. Of course, periodical maintenance and repair is a must. Then, while fixing the storage place, the relic should be moved to another place for a while before being brought back. But the problem was that the information leaked during that preparation. That eventually became a rumor and spread among students. The principal seemed to take it quite seriously. Someone is intentionally leaking the information. I see. The reason why I called you is because of this. I need your help, Professor Ludger. Help, huh? I think I knew the help that the principal was talking about without listening to it. I'd rather not make it obvious and just accept it silently. If I argued with the principal there, such behavior itself could only be seen as antipathy toward her. To gain her trust, I needed to show that I trusted her first. Trust toward each other wasn't one-sided toward only one party, but it was given and received by both parties. Trust was built through this method. In other words, when I immediately said that I would believe and follow her, it was no different than answering that I was not her enemy and that I fully believed what she said. It is better to maintain a good relationship with the principal for the long run. If I accept her request here, it will also erase the debt of my heart. I answered right away because of such a calculation. Of course, I emphasized the countenance of a soldier who did not show their feelings on the surface and just silently carried out the orders from their superiors. Professor Ludger, please be aware of the students' rumors and let me know immediately if anyone shows any suspicious movements. Other than that, I'll need help with transporting the relic. Understood. When should I move? The faster the better. Is there any other professor related to this job besides me? Yes. Indeed, but I don't think you'll encounter each other because you're in charge of different jobs. I see. It meant for me not to put too much concern on it. Even so, I couldn't believe she had called me out to do it, as I was just a new professor. She must have been very wary of me. Through my bet with Professor Chris, I had given a huge blow to Hugo's faction, but was that not enough? First of all, please behave as usual, Professor Ludger. We still have some time left before we move the relic. Understood. The incident would happen when the relic was out of its safe place. At that time, the people who deliberately spread the rumor of the relic would aim for it and make a move. And such people very likely belong to the Black Dawn Society. Things are flowing in an interesting way. She ordered me, a first order, to hunt down the members of the Black Dawn Society. It must have been a joke of destiny. Was it a coincidence, or did she do it on purpose? If it was perhaps the latter, and the principal thought that I was a traitor, she would think that I wouldn't be able to do the task. But that was a mistake. Come and read on our website, Wuxia World Site. Thanks, because there's no one who wants to expel the Black Dawn Society from Surin as much as me right now. They were a shackle to me. I never knew when or where they were going to suddenly do something crazy. I'll take this opportunity to check how great the Black Dawn Society is. Whatever was going to happen, it still didn't change the fact that there was an additional problem that I had to solve. It was a good thing that I had gotten an assistant in advance. Even though it was contradictory, because my assistant was a pawn of the Black Dawn Society. I'll contact you privately later. Yes, understood. After getting up from my seat, I bowed to the principal and left the principal's office. After Ludger left the principal's office, the principal, Alyssa Willow, stopped organizing her papers at the sound of knocking on the door and raised her chin. Please come in. When she gave the permission, the door opened quietly. Soon, Wilford entered the principal's office with a silver tray in one hand. On the tray were cookies and warm tea that was freshly brewed. Please enjoy. Ah, thank you. Don't mention it. This is my job. Alyssa stretched to loosen up her stiff body and immediately picked up a cookie and put it in her mouth. Ha, as expected, your cooking always tastes good whenever I eat it. You look very exhausted. Well, it's indeed true. The principal usually didn't show her feelings, but Wilford was an exception. He was a loyalist who had been assisting her for a very long time. So did Professor Ludger Chellisy accept your offer? Yes. He nodded obediently to my surprise. Alyssa was still amazed when thinking of it. Still, she had thought that he'd be surprised and ask her questions. As soon as he had heard her request, he had read the situation right away and accepted her request naturally. I'd say that he seemed like a soldier who absolutely obeys his superior's orders. At first, she had been suspicious of Ludger Chellisy, because she knew that suspicious individuals had infiltrated Surin. Their existence was so cleverly hidden that it was hard to tell whether they were employees, students, or professors. That was why Alyssa had put the new professors on the list of suspects, especially Ludger, whose past track record was relatively ambiguous. However, she had no choice but to change her mind when looking at the attitude that he showed afterwards. It was indeed unexpected that my Vascania didn't work on him, but looking at his behavior, it suggests that he has a strong mentality. His evaluation among the students was also overwhelmingly good. Especially the source code spell that he created, which was enough to stimulate Alyssa's curiosity even though she had only heard the rumor about it. If she had not held the heavy position of a principal, she would have searched for Ludger before anyone else. Ho ho, didn't I tell you so? He's a reliable person. But you were actually suspicious of him too at first. It was until I met him at the train station directly. Alyssa was suspicious because she didn't believe in Ludger, but now she thought it was okay for her to trust him. He had made the Hugo faction dumbfounded, which had been bothering her more than anything else. That alone had relieved her 1-year stress while she was working as the principal. Even so, she couldn't completely trust him. That was why she let him handle this job, Professor Ludger. This is the last time. I hope you can show me more than I expect. The principal mumbled so while chewing on her cookies. Knock, knock. I was reading a thesis in the professor's office when I heard a knock on the door and raised my chin. Who is it? I'm Sedna, Professor. I'm here to look for you because I have finished sorting out the homework. So it's Sedna. Come in. When I gave her permission, Sedna opened the door and came in. Her face, after having sorted out the homework of 80 people, was full of fatigue, but she was still proud that she had done it. Here's the summary. Yes, you have worked hard. Yes. I took off the rimless glasses on my face and carefully examined the data Sedna had been organizing. Sedna stared at me doing that with a blank look on her face. There's no issue. Good job. And no. It was a comfortable work because I just had to sort them out. Is that so? You worked hard. Now go back and take a rest. I'm also about to get off work. Ah, yes, you have worked hard. Sedna brightened up at my compliment and left the professor's office excitedly. As I was left alone again, I organized the pile of assignments Sedna had been sorting out, turned my head and stared out the window. Before I knew it, the sun had set and the sky turned dark. The twinkling stars embedded in the sky were so dazzling and brilliant that it was hard to see such starlight on the earth where I had lived. Was it already nighttime? The principal will call me again in the next few days. A relic that was kept in Surin, and the Black Dawn Society organization that was after such a relic. The principal had long been aware of the existence of the Black Dawn Society. Perhaps that would be the first proper fight between Surin and the Black Dawn Society. And I had gotten involved in that. I can't jump to conclusions yet because what I should do hasn't been decided, but I'm sure this is a big turning point. Rather, no matter how it was the biggest magic academy on the continent, I never imagined that a relic would exist in that place. A relic was not a simple object. They were objects with a huge mystery that even wizards could not identify. Tuck, tuck. I took the medicine out of the bottle and poured it into my mouth. After I felt refreshed and charged with mana, I suddenly remembered something, so I took an object out of my pocket. The principal would have thought I might have heard something about relics because I was a military officer, but that wasn't the case. There was only one reason why I wasn't surprised to hear about relics. Relic, huh? The object that I took out from my pocket. It was a piece of metal of unknown material that looked like a fragment dropped from some round object. I didn't know I'd find it in a place like this. Because I also had a relic. To be exact, it was a piece of something that used to be a relic. Chapter 60, Omnipotent Stone 2. Lynn kept tossing and turning while laying on the dormitory bed and staring blankly at the ceiling. She couldn't sleep even though she closed her eyes to sleep. The night was deeper than she thought, but it was also because her mind was a little uneasy. So Professor Ludger chose an assistant in the end. It wasn't exactly something strange. There was no reason why a man as busy as Ludger wouldn't pick an assistant. However, she was a little disappointed that the one in that position was not her. But it was something else from before that kept bothering her, the book about non-property magic. Lynn lay down after grabbing the book that she put at the bedside and opened it. Inside the book were detailed, organized words about non-property magic. The part when she felt uncomfortable with her magic until then, and even the situations that she hadn't realized yet. The book was full of such experiences. For her, who had suffered from various inconveniences due to her lack of properties so far, that book was beyond even 1,000 gold in value. I read it many times, but it's still seeping into my heart. Why did Professor Ludger willingly hand this over to me? And where did he obtain this? She was pretty much illiterate about magic, but she wasn't stupid enough not to know the value of the book. Obviously, the value of the book was pretty high. No, it wasn't only high, it was worth billions. She could even get enormous wealth and fame for her whole life if she took it and handed it over to the magic tower. But Ludger wasn't like that. He said that he did not write the book himself, and replied to her that it was right for the book to go back to its suitable owner. Then who on earth wrote this book? Every time Lynn opened the book, she felt strange. The author of the book did not reveal her name, and she had not even said the reason why she wrote such a book. The author was unknown. No matter how much she read the book, it was hard to even identify a clue of who the author was. But I don't think she's a complete stranger. Even though it was just her hunch, whenever Lynn saw the author's handwriting, her heart felt overwhelmed. She could feel the unknown familiarity and sense of longing through the writing itself. Lynn couldn't figure out why on earth she was like that. It's weird. I really don't know why I'm being like this. In the end, Lynn had no choice but to close the book. Let's just sleep instead of worrying about this kind of thing. Lynn covered her head completely with the blanket. However, she still couldn't sleep properly, so she had to wriggle, then toss and turn for hours. I had been traveling around the continent for a long time and swapping my identities. Sometimes as a mercenary, sometimes as a hunter, sometimes as a criminal consultant, sometimes as this, and sometimes as that. There was only one reason why I wandered around the world while hiding my real self, relics. An unknown world in which magic existed. An ancient relic containing an overwhelming mystery in it. I had gone around the world while looking for the other piece of the relic that I had. The sun had completely set, and a night full of starlight had emerged in the sky. I sat by the window of my accommodation and remained still on a chair under the moonlight. I came here after receiving information that there was a relic in this empire, but I didn't know there was one more in Surin. It felt like I had spotted an unintended gain. Of course, I didn't think that the relic I was looking for and the omnipotent stone in Surin were the same relic. The relic piece I had could be called a similar relic if looking at its categories, but its effects and performance were completely different. However, there must have been a good reason for why there was a rumor that it was called a stone that granted wishes. I don't really covet the omnipotent stone itself, But if I can discover another piece of the relic that I'm currently looking for with the omnipotent stone, it was a slim chance, no matter how I looked at it. Relics themselves were so rare that they weren't easy items to be found just because I wanted to find them. Even for me, who had been wandering on the continent for a long time, meeting countless people, and going through all sorts of incidents. There were only 3 pieces of the relic that I had gotten from that struggle, including the one I held. Guessing from the size and shape of the pieces, there are 4 left to find. A total of 7 pieces must be collected to complete one relic. If I did that, I would obviously. I stared silently at the first piece in my hand. I had first obtained it due to an overlapping coincidence. The miracle that the last remnant of power in that relic fragment showed me, if only I could reproduce it again. Beep, beep, beep. After thinking that far, I slowly got up from my seat. It was because a signal came from the crystal ball that I had for private contacts. I put mana into my fingertips and spilled it slightly onto the crystal ball. Soon, the crystal ball shone softly and a voice was heard. "Are you there?" "Hands." It was Hanz who contacted me. Well, actually, Hanz was indeed the only one who privately contacted. The number of people who privately contacted me would increase later, but not at that moment. "What's the matter?" "After you defeated them in that battle, I've finished roughly organizing." "So you're talking about the remaining organization?" Yes. Han's voice from beyond the crystal ball even contained the relief that he had finished his job. "So what happened?" "There's no one who's against us for now. It's a relief for us and for them." "Do they accept our existence unexpectedly meekly?" "Yes." "Well, to be honest, what can they do if they don't accept it anyway? Just the 2 of us have cruelly and completely destroyed the existing Crimson Society. No, actually, you did it alone." Even so, they were the body of the organization that also rolled for a long time in the darkness of Leathervelk. We can't just ignore them. "I know it. That's why I told you that it's a relief." "Well, they're not interested in supremacy in the first place, so it's enough if they just have adequate space." Even so, there must have been a lot of talk about the authority that the Crimson Society had before. The Crimson Society had been in charge of all the dirty businesses in the underworld of Leathervelk. Drugs, alcohol, gambling. Even without drugs, the bars and gambling houses operated by the Crimson Society were large enough to bring in a considerable amount of money. Since the organization that was handling those businesses disappeared overnight, their surroundings must have become very noisy about it. Some of those organizations might want to take that opportunity to try reaching out with the intention of having a round of battle with them. I was sure those people who couldn't even think of overpowering the Crimson Society before must have raised their heads one by one. The time for chaos had come. Unless someone appeared and condemned the chaos at that time, there would be a bloody smell within the alley. For now, the other 3 organizations are working together to keep us under control, but this probably needs to be discussed later, of course. Our side has the initiative, but still, I don't have the ability to negotiate this alone, so I need your help. When do you need it? The faster the better, but this is not an urgent matter. You can decide about it comfortably. Even though he said that, I knew that I shouldn't delay it for too long. I'd have to be on the negotiation table in at least a week. It would be easier for me to make a move right then if I could. I can't do it right now because I have a task to do related to the omnipotent stone. Sooner or later, the omnipotent stone would be moved away from its existing storage area and transferred to a temporary storage area. Come and read on our website, Wuxia World Site. Thanks, since in the process of its preparation, the information on it had leaked and the rumor had spread. Perhaps the mastermind of the rumor had already known when and where the omnipotent stone would be moved. It's certainly the work of the Black Dawn Society, but the question is who the hell masterminded this case? They hadn't contacted me yet. If there was any contact, then Sedna would have tipped me off right away. I don't know yet if the First Order other than me did his job on his own lines, or if there was a reason other than that. But one thing I could be sure of was that the incident surrounding the omnipotent stone would happen sooner or later. That was why I couldn't be away from Surin right then. I'll go there within a week. Is there something that's also going to happen there, something related to a relic? Oh my. Ainz, who had a good ear for information, immediately understood when I said the word relic. You have a professor identity, but why does it seem that you've experienced more incidents than before? I agree. And a relic, you said. Is it because Surin is that prestigious? Who would have thought that the Academy would keep relics in it? It's a place with that much history and tradition. According to rumors, there's also a secret dungeon made by the first principal. Don't tell me that's real as well. Ainz, don't spit out too much nonsense. Tusk, it's a joke. Anyway, we'll try to arrange the negotiation time for this week before you come out. Yeah, work hard. After I finished my call with Ainz, I looked up out the window without saying a word. Relic, I wasn't aiming for it, but I had someone gotten involved in that relic case. I wondered if it was fate. That night, the moonlight floating in the night sky felt unusually cold. Your Highness, shall we prepare your bath? No, never mind. Would you like to have a meal? I'm already full. Then how about some snacks? It's a rule not to eat anything in the evening. Please just step back. At Elendil's order, the employees bowed their heads as they were at a loss of what to do and stepped back. Fee! Elendil, who was barely left alone, sighed in a low voice so as not to be heard by her employees. If anyone heard her sigh once more, they'd immediately stick to her and bother her asking about any concerns that she had. Finally, Elendil entered her room, as she had been freed from other people's eyes. It's tiring. When the other students were assigned to stay in a dormitory, she was assigned to stay in a large mansion and was staying there as a princess. No matter how much Surin treated everyone equally, they dared not ignore the blood of the royal family that she possessed. Elendil was dissatisfied with it. I also wanted to get along normally like other students. It was her honest feelings that she wanted to have a new semester, make new friends, and live an exciting life at an academy. But her status as the third princess didn't leave her alone that easily. Apart from the magnificent mansion, the extreme hospitality of more than 30 employees toward her made her feel something beyond gratitude. She felt uncomfortable. Even so, this is something I can't do anything about. Considering her position, Elendil should acknowledge it and move on from that particular bother. If she didn't care about others' eyes and acted according to her own will, it would only be harder for the employees and her maids. To be considerate of them, she needed to listen to what they wanted, even if it was inconvenient for her. Even so, well, it's not like the inconvenience is unbearable. Normally, it would have caused her a lot of stress, but recently, it had also decreased. It was because Elendil also had a person she could call her friend. Lynn was a very pretty and nice junior. The fact that she was a commoner bothered Elendil, but it was because Elendil was worried about Lynn's treatment toward her. She had no intention of looking down at Lynn because that girl was a commoner at all. Still, maybe it was because she behaved in front of Lynn without constraint. Elendil felt good because she seemed to fulfill the life she wanted little by little. I hope I can make more friends like this one by one. At least the academy was where Elendil could get away from her aggressive older sister's touch. Just as she thought so, someone knocked on her door. Elendil, who had been fully relaxed, immediately straightened up and asked in a solemn voice, "What's the matter?" "Your Highness, you got a call from the outside." "A call?" Elendil was slightly concerned inside on hearing the word call. Because it was impossible to contact the princess directly unless the person had a fairly high status. And usually, in that case, the identity of the person who contacted her was always obvious. Don't tell me, it's not my sister, right? The first princess. Although they were successors to the same throne, the first princess and Elendil were not particularly on bad terms. In fact, since it had been determined that the first princess would be the successor to the throne, competition between siblings could not be found no matter how hard one looked for it. All the more because Elendil didn't really want that position in the first place. However, her older sister, the first princess, showed a strange amount of affection for Elendil. Sometimes, she even went too far. "I'm not my sister's doll." The reason why Elendil entered Surin was also actually to escape from her sister's interference. In some ways, It was also natural for her to worry about whether her sister was trying to interfere in her life, even within Surin. Fortunately, however, it was not the first princess who contacted her. It's the Lord Protector, Miss Terina Lionhowl. Terina, the Knight Captain. She was rather a completely unexpected person. Terina Lionhowl. Elendil had never thought that Terina would contact her, considering that she was the strongest knight in the Exilian Empire. Bring it in. The employee immediately brought in the communication crystal ball that they had prepared. They then bowed their head and stepped back. After confirming that there were no people, Elendil activated the crystal ball. I heard that you're looking for me, Captain Terina. I apologize for calling you late at night. Your Highness, Elendil the Princess. This is because there is an extremely urgent matter. No, it's okay. Rather, I became curious as to why the Knight Captain suddenly contacted me. So what's the matter? I heard that a werewolf appeared in Surin recently. Have you heard about it too, Your Highness? She knew about it. Because she faced the werewolf right under her own nose. If Ludger hadn't shown up to help her then, she might have been severely hurt. However, if she told Terina about it, Terina was bound to say something about the princess's safety, so Elendil replied to her while hiding that fact for now. Yes, I heard about it, and I heard that it was also solved soon after. There is also a werewolf here in Leathervelk. Pardon? Dame Terina, then are you currently in Leathervelk? Yes, I'm currently investigating an incident related to that. An incident, huh? We have to investigate this secretly, so please kindly forgive us for not telling you, Your Highness. No, you don't have to apologize. The fact that Terina stepped up meant that the security department had moved. She obviously had no choice but to be careful. While I was investigating the case, I confirmed that this werewolf case is not a common one. Terina Lionhowl's powerful voice echoed throughout the room beyond the crystal ball. Your Highness. Do you maybe perhaps who solved the werewolf case in Surin? For more chapters, join my Patreon, link in description.